That's fair. That's what June.
Okay.
We'll just wait for the recording to commence.
Yep.
Recording started, right? Good to go.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Just to advise, this meeting is being recorded and placed on the council's website for public viewing. I'd also like to welcome to the meeting today Councillor Elaine Cowan, who is the Cabinet Member with responsibility for lifelong learning, education, skills and culture, and she'll be talking in respect of item 4. And also we have our 2 new graduate trainees who have joined the climate change team. That would be Natasha and Steph, so welcome. Hello and welcome. Okay, Stuart, can we call for the swearing and intimate any apologies, please?
Yep. Good morning, Chair, and thank you. In terms of swearing, Chair, Councillor Lillian Jones.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Watts. Councillor Watts.
Yes, I'm here.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor David Richardson. Okay. Councillor Stephen Canning. Councillor Canning. Oh, Chair, Councillor Canning and Richardson just appeared. Okay, thank you. Councillor Peter Maven.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Have an apology from Councillor Beverly Clark. Councillor Sally Cogley.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor William Lennox.
Morning, here.
Yep, thank you. Councillor June Kyle.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
Yes, good morning. I'm here. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And Councillor Elaine Stewart.
Yep, I'm here, thanks.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Okay, so does anybody have any declarations of interest? No, none in the chamber. Any online? No. Okay, that's great. So item 2 is the previous minutes. And okay, so I will move them as a correct minute. Okay, Councillor Richardson seconds that, Stuart. Are there any comments regarding the minute? None? None online? Okay, thank you. So we'll go on to item 3, and that's the update on climate change actions and climate change public sector report for 21-22, and that's been presented by James Lally. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just give you a brief overview of the report to start with, and I'd like to acknowledge that this, although I'm standing here presenting this report, the report and the content of the report reflects the commitment to climate change and actions that are being implemented across a whole range of services in the council. I particularly like to thank Kenny Nicholson and the Energy team for their support in pulling together the detailed figures that are appended in Appendix 2 to this report. In terms of climate change, what the report's trying to do is trying to pull together our climate change public sector report for 2021-22, which provides details of our carbon emissions across a range of services and a range of specific areas, and also to then link that with our climate change strategy and the progress update around delivering net zero and our action plans that were agreed in June 21 and subsequently in approving the £1 million climate change fund as part of this year's budget. Set against the 4 strategic themes of the strategy, which are energy, transport, waste and the natural environment, and also comments on the leadership and the support and role of our children and young people who continue to play a really active role in our climate change response here in East Ayrshire. Give a wee bit of an update on the links between the cost of living crisis and climate change activities and support that were given to our communities and business. Sets out some governance and project oversight arrangements that have been approved by Cabinet. And finally, kind of gives an overview of conclusions and future direction. So turning to our carbon emissions, and I think this is just a kind of health warning around some of these figures. Our performance in the reporting year 2020-21 was influenced by changes and variations to the weighting applied to the matrix at the back, and that can actually have quite a significant impact on our carbon emissions, as I'll discuss as we go through the report. COVID restrictions remained in place during the reporting year, and this further complicates the picture because we had premises operating with open windows and heating's on for ventilation purposes, and a range of other influencing factors around COVID. The size of our estate actually increased, and a carbon factor has now been applied to home working. All of this makes comparison to previous years' performance very difficult, but we can demonstrate real good progress across the reported scopes and themes of our strategy. So turning to our carbon emissions, as the graph shows, we have had a steady decline since the baseline year of 2012, a fall of 24% in our emissions, and a further 3% reduction in our emissions in the reporting year 2021. In terms of how that carbon footprint is made up, there are 3 scopes within the carbon reporting, and what we see is a decline in scopes 1 and 2, which are gas and electricity consumption and transport, and a rise in scope 3, which is primarily as a result of our waste. So the focus has been very much on our waste and trying to tackle that in the first couple of years of our strategy. So turning to the individual themes, in terms of energy, our gas consumption actually fell by 3.4%, and when we apply the weather factors, it was a much worse winter and across the year. It was actually a 9.4% real-term reduction. Our electricity consumption actually increased a bit, and that actually reflects the shift from gas heating to more green energy sources and electricity as we move to ground and air-sourced heat pumps to power our new buildings. Our electricity consumption has, though, fallen overall. When we compare with the last pre-COVID year, there's been an 11% reduction. So we see that steady change and improvement across our estate. Some of the key achievements around energy, we've continued to apply our energy management systems and automatic meter reading, and good energy practices around behaviour change is really important. And I know Natasha and Steph are doing some campaigning at the moment around behaviour change and linked to the cost of living crisis. Street lighting improvement programme continues. In the reporting year, we reached 70%. I think we're now at 83% in the current year. So we see steady progress and improvement across street lighting, reducing our energy consumption. The Barony campus is now operational, and we estimate that will give us an 8% reduction in our energy consumption across the estate as we close some of the legacy properties as well. Nether Robert and Comores early childhood centres all use net zero emission heating sources. And looking to the future, we have exemplar plans passive house design around the Dunlop Early Childhood Centre, which is just under construction recently. In the Doon campus, it will be the first net zero carbon public sector building standards. And St Sophia's Primary School is a really interesting one. It'll be the first in Scotland to be retrofit to ENERFIT standards, and that's going to be a real demonstrator and exemplar of how we actually decarbonise our estate through refurbishment. The core demonstrator projects will further inform our approach around energy, and looking to the future, we've commissioned an Ayrshire Energy Master Plan, which will give us outline opportunities for energy generation and for looking at the overall picture across the whole of Ayrshire and how we can actually decarbonise our energy management or our energy consumption. We also have commissioned, or are about to commission, and have received funding from the Scottish Government to undertake a local heat and energy efficiency strategy, and that's to be completed by the end of 2023. And that will actually show us energy consumption across both public and private sector properties, and actually give us a real idea of where we need to improve and where we need to target improvement. And as I say, that will be supported by the behaviour change campaign that I mentioned at the start and is linked to our cost of living crisis. Turning to transport, the new reporting criteria and weighting, together with our continued shift to greener vehicles, has reduced our transport emissions from around 12% of the total to now 10%. And this will reduce significantly following the move to diesel and hydrogenated vegetable oil. The council's fleet has actually transitioned, and all of the diesel vehicles will now use the vegetable oil, and that will reduce our emissions from, I think that started from April this year, to around 90% of what we previously had. So we will see a real fall in our transport emissions in the next reporting year. We now have 101 electric vehicles in our fleet and recently completed 2 million electric miles. We're on target to have our cars and small van fleet all electric by 2023, subject to the review of capital funding and affordability. And looking to our bigger and kind of larger fleet, cost, load and capacity remain a challenge for our large van fleet and HGV fleet. There really is a kind of battle as to whether it's going to be an electric solution or whether it's going to be a hydrogen solution. For the real high energy consumptions like our refuge vehicles, we think that it may well be a hydrogen solution, but there's lots of work and research and development going on in that area at the moment. So that the shift to the vegetable oil fuel buys us some time to transition and will allow colleagues in ARA to work with services to determine the best solutions based on emerging vehicle cost and within the context of that capital borrowing and affordability review that I mentioned. One area that we would like to highlight is grey fleet miles have increased significantly. We would expect that as we come out of COVID. We had hoped to maintain them at 50% of pre-COVID levels, but they now remain 35% below what they were pre-COVID. And I think that'll be a focus for future, for management action and just to monitor that within the context of our electric car pool and our electric fleet. Turning to active travel, we've got the active travel strategy was approved by Cabinet in June, and we've got project design consultants appointed for the Kilmarnock Infinity Loop. We really want to encourage active travel in our schools, and we have moved from a beat the street proposal to an in-house, more sustainable and council-wide project called Walk to the Moon, which is actually going to encourage our children across East Ayrshire to walk to the moon instead of getting a lift to school. And you can see some of the ideas from our children and young people at the climate change conference that was really supportive and innovative in terms of their active travel solutions to work from the Wordle there. Turning to waste. Waste, as I mentioned at the start, is now our most significant carbon emitter and accounts for almost half of the council's carbon footprint. I think this has been exacerbated by COVID as we see more people working from home and staying at home and takeaways and things like that. Just the lifestyle changes that have been embedded through COVID have increased our domestic waste. And that has been further exacerbated by changes in the weighting applied, which have increased by 2% this year. And actually, when that's applied to the waste that we produce and that goes to landfill, has actually increased our carbon emissions by 4%. So that gives you an idea how this weighting can really impact on the overall figures. Turning to waste, the projects that have been delivered, we've got the new waste recycling contract, and that really is a game changer. That's going to shift away from landfill and move our waste to waste to energy. And we reckon that 20 to 30% of our waste in the current year will be disposed of through waste to energy. We're hoping that will improve and increase in subsequent years. And I'll talk about it at the end of this slide about how that will impact on our waste. We've also in our schools got our litter and recycling initiatives, and they're making good progress. And we're about to revitalise and roll out some new arrangements in relation to these within our schools. The food waste campaign goes on, and phase 1 delivered a 200% increase in the number of requests for our food caddies, and that translated into a 12% increase in the levels of food waste that we were receiving. But we know that we need to do more. So phase 2 is about to commence. It may even already have started, and that will target those who fail to present their food caddies. And this is with the aim of encouraging long-term behaviour change. I think we'd set some really ambitious targets. I think we was going to increase our food levels of food waste collection by around 250 times what we currently do. So what we're doing is bringing them back to be more realistic, but yet still challenging. And we're looking to achieve a 5% reduction in the levels of food waste and our residual waste over the next 3 years. That will be supported by investment in our community waste officers, and they are currently being recruited, and they'll support and encourage and identify through data analysis which communities aren't really recycling their food, and have some targeted action to support those people to do that. I mentioned the game-changing new contract. If and when we become fully compliant with the biodegradable landfill and have all our waste diverted from landfill to waste-to-energy plants, we will see a 48% reduction in the council's overall carbon footprint, and that won't be too far away. That's on its way to being delivered in the next couple of years, and that will completely change our focus and our priorities. Turning to the natural environment, natural environment really has a positive impact on our carbon footprint. We've completed our green space audits, and these will inform our green infrastructure strategy that will come to Cabinet early 23. We've got the sense of place, Galloway Southern Ayrshire UNESCO Biosphere, which will support local people to identify and celebrate our unique biosphere here in East Ayrshire. We've got the North Kyle Master Plan, Forestry and Land Scotland, and Coalfield to Wild Woodlands, both restoring and enhancing our natural environment, real potential and massive tree planting initiatives in these areas. Within the council, we support East Ayrshire Woodlands to create woodlands and to manage our current woodlands, and we've invested some money there, which will see some further planting. We've got interest in growing initiatives from our community groups, and we have a potential funding bid that we're looking to develop there, which will expand and potentially link with our community larders, where they would be supported by growing initiatives. And finally, Cabinet agreed to sign up to the Edinburgh Declaration on Biodiversity. I did want to give a summary of our children and young people. I mentioned that they are leading the way and continue to be at the forefront of our climate change action. We had our first Clean Green Education Awards in June this year. 18 schools recognised and received bronze awards, and On Thank were the exemplar, and they received a silver award, which really reflected that they were outreaching to their community and working with their community in so many ways across each of the 4 themes. Our third conference was held in October, was attended by 160 pupils, and they were joined by members and officers, and around another 200 pupils tuned in online. We heard from the winners of the Climate Change Awards, and they spread that best practice and enthusiasm for climate change to those that were in attendance. And we now have 34 school climate change action plans anticipated to be submitted this year, over 500 individual actions, and this will be supported, and the schools will be supported through the Climate Change Education Fund. Turning to business, our Net Zero Support Grant will help local businesses to reduce their carbon emissions and energy bills. Halo and Net Zero Nation, we have a partnership with them to establish a Net Zero Centre of Excellence, which will support 25 local businesses to be competitive and compliant in the new green economy. And our community wealth building locality officers are working with businesses across Ayrshire to focus on green growth objectives. 124 businesses supported to date and 12 applications received from our grant funding. Our work with communities really has focused on the climate change and the assistance with cost of living. Natasha and Steph that were introduced have actually developed a clean green eco cookbook, which will signpost energy efficient, low waste and affordable ways to cook. And that will be supported by some cooking demonstrations and climate change workshops that will be delivered in the Warm Space Events programme and in our schools. Drongan has been identified as a climate action town and will receive support from the Scottish Government and through agency funding to look at how they can embed and roll out climate change actions within the context of the local community. And that's an approach that we hope to learn from and replicate in other communities across East Ayrshire. The Scottish Government have actually funded an Ayrshire Climate Change Action Hub, and that's really a grassroots up approach, which is what we want to encourage here in East Ayrshire. 2 new coordinators have been appointed, and we want to maximise that resource and see how we can work together, because they've got funding pots, we've got funding pots, to see how we can actually support and maximise that investment in our local communities to support climate change actions. And finally, we have agreed to work with our partner, the Energy Agency, to open up access to EcoFlex 4. And that is a scheme that will support and provide grant funding to the most inefficient homes in East Ayrshire. And it's funded by the energy providers themselves, but the council has to agree to open it up and put in place contractual arrangements and give people access to approved contractors. So arrangements are in place to have that actioned and operational early in the new year. Cabinet also agreed some project oversight, and the Member Officer Working Group on Climate Change will continue to lead in that regard, and we've matched up the members and our young people around the key themes, and there'll be some education and training and development of actions around that. And we have 2 officer-led project oversight groups, Energy and Transport, recognising the big investment and synergies around there, and then Waste and Natural Environment, again recognising the links between the 2. These groups will meet quarterly, and reports on climate change will be by exception through East Ayrshire Performs. So just to conclude and give you an idea of our future direction, I would say excellent progress has been made. We're going to see real breakthroughs in transport and in waste, but not all of this is reflected in the current year's reporting data. We now know that we have the solutions that will allow us to reach net zero. What we need to do is actually focus and find the funding to actually do that. So moving our waste disposal to landfill and waste to energy will really be a game changer. That will halve the council's carbon footprint, and it will shift the graph. The 2 graphs at the bottom actually show how that will shift the emphasis from waste to energy and the decarbonisation of our estate. And as highlighted within the report, funding it remains a real issue. I think the cost associated with this, with decarbonisation of our estate, is going to be a real challenge, and it's going to require some innovation from national governments and local government and the private sector just to see how we fund that. That concludes my presentation. I'm not an expert in all of these areas, but I do have some colleagues in the room that have joined us that may be able to help, and I'm happy to take any questions in discussion, Chair.
Thanks very much, James. That was a good presentation. I'm going to open it up to members. Any questions, members, or comments? Okay. Councillor Cogley, you want to come in?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. James, thank you very much for that report, and your enthusiasm for the climate change agenda absolutely shines out of you. And it's good to have Natasha and Steph also working with us on the climate change agenda, and I'm pleased to be part of that member officer working group. A few things that I'd like to raise. First of all, the project at St Sophia's in my ward is extremely exciting, and I'm delighted that we're going ahead, and that this is, well, looking forward to seeing this being developed in the new year. It really is an exciting one for all of us. The next point I'd like to highlight is the PV park in New Mills, which is a wholly community-led initiative. But I would like to thank David McDowell and his team for their contribution. and ongoing support in relation to this piece of work. And we've got it, for those of you who aren't aware of it, we are currently carrying out a feasibility study into the possibility of using the old Vesuvius plant, which is a huge redundant industrial park, and we're looking at installing PV, whatever they are, things to generate power. And this project is going to be phased over a number of different stages, and if the feasibility project is successful, then this will be very, very exciting. The next point I'd like to raise is the Scottish Government consultation on litter and fly tipping that was completed at the end of March this year seems to have gone very quiet. And James, I think perhaps this is something that you and I could take up with the Scottish Government, and will perhaps be guided as to how we can best do this, because a number of recommendations were supposed to have been put forward to then be implemented across Scotland. And as the local authority, we put a lot of time and effort, and therefore money, into contributing towards this consultation, as did many other local authorities. So, James, perhaps we'll take this one up separately. I'm aware that this has been discussed in length. This paper has been discussed at length in Cabinet, so I don't want to repeat the matters that were highlighted at Cabinet, but just wish to highlight a couple of points. The paragraph 56, the narrative in relation to reduction, I would like us to see us putting a bit more emphasis on that in terms of reducing the amount of materials that are actually produced. So, for example, you can go into a supermarket and buy apples loose, but if you're buying a toothbrush, you buy it in a blister pack, and the blister packs, I know, contribute hugely to unnecessary plastic waste. And the argument is always one of hygiene. Well, you can buy a free apple, you can wash your toothbrush when you buy it. So I think these are things that we should be pursuing. Paragraph 62, the reduction in food waste. This came up at Cabinet last week, and I'm not quite clear that the response was detailed enough. So I'd quite like to hear why our targets have changed so dramatically in relation to that. Paragraph 67, and I'm moving on to the new waste disposal contract. Now, my fear in this is that if all waste is potentially transferable into some other form of energy, is this going to deter people, a psychological deterrence perhaps, from recycling paper, card, tin, glass, and all the other materials that we recycle? So I'd like a little bit of discussion on that, please. And EV charging, our role as a facilitator. I know within the Valley in Ward 6 that a number of people are deterred from purchasing electric cars because of the lack of EV charging points. Now, I know Kevin is working on this, but we really need this as to be a little bit more urgent, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sally. James, you want to respond to some
Yes,
of those points,
thanks, Councillor Cogley, and always happy to work with you and to hear from you regarding the fly tipping campaign. I think we probably need to involve some colleagues in our Greener Communities team with that, but happy to take that on board. Turning to the other matters that you raised, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the waste hierarchy, discouraging people from creating the waste in the first place is the primary concern. I think this is an area that national government are taking on board, and there is some legislation going through Westminster at the moment, as far as I understand, it will focus on the producer pays. And that will actually start charging the producers who are creating the waste that you talked about with toothpaste, with brushes and the packaging. And once they actually start having to pay for the disposal of that, I think it will really focus minds. So that it is something that we can attack locally, but that we can get real assistance nationally. And I think we'll see real behaviour change around that. We already see it in many of our shops because consumers are demanding change, and supermarkets and retailers are really starting to listen. So we are on top of that. There's a number of initiatives locally. The new Cumnock repair and reuse facility is probably one that I would highlight, and that we would want to see replicated and hope to use that to reduce our waste. But I mean, there already is so much going on at Western Road to reuse and actually take things out of the waste stream and reuse them. So there's a number of areas, and some of the wee videos that we'll produce highlight some of that. Turning to your other points about the new contract, I mean, I don't think that we can ever. Once waste actually reaches the residual bin, that's where we don't want it to be. And I think that messaging needs to be out there, needs to be clear. We want people to recycle and recycle their paper and their card and all of that as much as we possibly can. And our collection arrangements really encourage that. So I would hope that wouldn't change the behaviour, although I think it's something that we would want to keep an eye on. And finally, the EV charging network, as you mentioned, Kevin's working on that, and we'll come back with a report. In relation to the target, sorry, that was the one that I missed around the food waste. I think, as Malcolm highlighted to Cabinet, and he apologises that he can't be here this morning, the targets were just far too ambitious. And I think we need to be realistic in terms of the targets that we set. And based on the experience that we've had with phase 1 of the campaign, it is going to be a long haul. People are not going to change their behaviours overnight. And it's almost we need to reiterate the importance of taking that food waste out of the residual waste and encouraging recycling. As I say, it's supported, and there's some investment to support that around the Climate Change Fund, and we're hoping that it will start to see, or it's already delivering some results, but we're hoping to see more significant improvement in reaching these new targets.
Okay, thanks very much, James. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Councillor Cannon.
Yeah, thanks, James, for that report. Just a little kind of small anecdote, which is a warning, and I'll try and keep it very, very brief because it's quite a long story. I love milk, and I started taking milk from. I used to get semi-skim milk, but I decided I love milk, so I was going to get it from Waskill Farm. About a week after I started getting the milk, I was listening to the radio, and a well-known public figure was telling us that we should all be drinking oat milk because dairies after meats damages the environment. I was a bit disappointed. I kept going with the milk, trying to convert to oat milk, but it was a struggle. Anyway, went to the climate change conference, which was fantastic, by the way, and I think gives us a lot of optimism, with the kids that were there. At the end of the climate change conference, we were asked to make a pledge. So this was the chance. So I made a pledge to go to oat milk. So went home and I had to do it. So I went on to oat milk. 2 weeks ago, or whatever it was at the town centre planning conference at along the road, and the sales manager from Waskill was there. Anyway, he put me right because Waskill was local. They're doing some fantastic work in getting carbon neutral. I was purchasing oat milk, which was coming from a manufacturer, wherever, been transported. I can now drink milk. So we just need to be a bit careful sometimes with the messages that not everything's quite as it appears. So if you're doing something, maybe do a bit of research, which is what I should have done before stop drink milk. So anyway, so thanks to Mossgiel Farm. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cannon. James, I would just like to ask, in regards to food waste, what are the barriers that's preventing people from recycling their food? Now, I used to live in a street, maybe we were about 60 people in the street, and it was mixed buildings. So there was like flatty properties and also houses. And come pick up day, there might be 4 food waste bins out for emptying. If that was a good day. When I spoke to people, they were saying they didn't like the wee caddies in their kitchens, and other people were saying they didn't like the idea of the waste being collected and put in the bin outside. They didn't want to attract any cats or vermin or whatever. But I tried to explain to them that doesn't happen. You know, I do it. It's never happened to me. But there must be other barriers that's preventing people from preventing them from recycling their food, and that's one of the biggest contributors to our carbon footprint. You know, so I think, you know, what are the barriers, and how can we get that message across that actually, you know, a small change can have a huge impact, and certainly for East Ayrshire Council that will have a huge impact. So, I mean, tea bags, eggshells, banana skins, apple cores, you know, it just doesn't seem reasonable to me.
Can I come in that, Chair?
Of course you can.
It's just in our house, Lillian, we use the food caddy all the time. So we do present the waste, and we're going through the wee green bags that they're going out of fashion. Because for the first thing is, you probably need to put 4 of the green bags in your food caddy. Because see, if you try and put 1 in and then you lift it out, it just falls apart. So that's the first thing that folk will not like. The second thing is, and there's comedians up and down the country during their stand-ups that talk about this, bin juice. Because you get, when you take the bag out, at the bottom of the food caddy, you've got the horrible bin juice, and that smells. And the third thing is, they do attract flies in your kitchen. So it was just that's basically why some people, and again, they're just kind of things that will put people off using the food caddies. But I would have to say that they've got to be used because it's the way forward, and we do use it. But that's 3 things that I've noticed about the food caddy that might put some folk off.
Do you want to come in, James?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think that's a really good practical example, and I religiously, I mean, I actually pick stuff out of the main bin and put it into the food bin. And I'm actually a different local authority, and I don't actually get the bags, so I have to buy them myself. So in East Ayrshire, we are actually doing as much as we possibly can. We did some survey work on this when we actually approved the climate change strategy, and we asked people what was putting them off. And the main areas were the smell, and people thought that there was a smell. And I don't know what your own experience is, but I mean, when food waste is collected once a week, maybe slightly different in summer, where now heat can be a contributing factor. But over the winter, I mean, there's virtually no smell, and the caddies have a sealed lid on them, which actually keeps the smell in and keeps the juice in as well. So, I mean, we've looked at this. This is something that Malcolm and his team, we've looked at different types of caddies, we've looked at different types of bags. We've exhausted all of the different options to try and actually do this. But the one thing I would say is reinforcing the messaging. It's getting the education out there that it's really damaging to the environment, that when food waste goes into the residual bin, it creates methane, which is the most dangerous gas, and even more dangerous than carbon dioxide when it comes to climate change. And that we can really make a difference with that. And that there's some, again, the videos that were produced, Councillor Barton and his banana, showing that can power a mobile phone for 2 days, and getting that messaging actually when people say, oh, hold on, I'm chucking that in the bin, and it could actually be going to produce energy. I think there's a bit of a myth busting that we need to do around the smell and around the the kind of the gooiness of it. I mean, when we actually did the analysis of the waste and looked at what was going into the bins, there were people who were just throwing full ready meals that were just past their sell-by date into their bin. And now that the weight in that alone is when you actually feel it, they just need to open it up and put it into their food bin. It's changing that behaviour. I mean, you open it up, although there might be a bit of mould on it, it doesn't smell. And I think the other thing that we need to highlight is that to shop smart, and that actually in the cost of living crisis, the average family can save, and this was before prices started rising, about £750 a year if they don't waste their food. There's some shocking stat, like 1 in 5 bags of shopping actually goes to waste in Scotland. So now when we start getting these messages out that it's good for the environment, it's good for your household budget, and it's actually good for the council because we save a bit of money as well. This is the message, and it's a no-brainer that we should be doing this, but we just need to keep pushing it. I think the next phase of the food campaign, where we actually start to chat people's doors and work with communities that aren't recycling it and give them that education and these facts, will really move on to the, now it'll focus people's opinions and educate them more, and I'm hoping that we'll see that transitional shift, and it'll just become natural, like the way we recycle glass and plastics and other things.
I totally agree, James. But what I'd like to see is recycling opportunities rolled out to every single property in East Ayrshire. I know that there's 118 sites, locations in East Ayrshire where there's no recycling. The figures broken down into that is it's over 1,800 properties, and 700 of those properties are offered recycling opportunities, but whether they take them up or not is another matter, and over 400 are not being offered the recycling opportunities. So I think these are huge numbers, and what I'd like to see is it rolled out to absolutely every single residential home in East Ayrshire to help us reach our targets.
Absolutely agree with you, Chair, and I think Malcolm would concur with that as well. I actually spoke to Malcolm yesterday about that very fact, and what they've actually got is a spreadsheet of all of the properties that aren't currently recycling. There are a range of issues. I know that some of them have actually been introduced and then it hasn't worked, and they've refused the recycling arrangements. There's also some issues around ownership and where to locate communal bins and communal properties, which we are working through and have a programme. But I can assure you, Chair, that it's not for the lack of effort. Malcolm and his team it's a top priority for them. And I think, again, the community waste recycling officers will go out and educate and actually work with the areas that don't have that, because we're keen to offer it and just try and overcome some of these specific problems. But it's a focus for our waste service and for Malcolm and his team.
That's good. And just a comment, actually, on the back of Councillor Cogley's about the electrical charging points. My personal view is, if you can afford to go out and buy an electric car, then surely you can have a home charger. That's just my personal view. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, Councillor Stewart, you want to come in?
Yep, James, great to see all the impressive stuff going on within our schools. And me being a newbie, I had to go and Google passive design. I didn't really know what it meant. But after Googling it, can you tell me what the difference will be between St Sophia's and Dune Academy? Because one's a retrofit and one's a new build. And that's my first question. Secondly, how many action plans have we done with climate actions in them right across the authority? And third, I was out yesterday with the people from Climate Town, and I'm still not sure what a climate town is going to be or what it's going to mean to the people of Drungin. So just a wee bit clarity on that for me, please.
Thanks, Chair. Right, so first one, I'll go in reverse order. Climate Change Town is a Scottish Government initiative. It's only introduced in the last year, and what they're trying to do, they've engaged Architectural and Design Scotland to support communities in developing their local response to climate change. Now, that could be around mitigation measures, or it could be around how we actually decarbonise a village. I think there's massive scope and potential in Drongan with the funding opportunities that we've got through the 9 CCs and the huge natural resources that we've got in that area of our authority to look at doing something really innovative. And the team that have been engaged through Architecture and Design Scotland will work with, and it's this sort of grassroots approach to identify those opportunities and to support the communities in turning them into action. I think you and I attended the first year workshop of the 7 or 8 climate action towns that were supported in the first year of this initiative, and I think it is difficult. It's about awareness raising and actually focusing people's minds on what the issues are and how they can achieve them. So how that will develop, I think it's a learning curve for all of us, and I'm sure Architectural and Design Scotland, it's been a bit of a learning curve for them, but we want to support it as much as we can. The council, we had a meeting with colleagues in Architecture and Design Scotland involving the range of officers across the council that will be involved in supporting this, and they now know where they can come if they get an idea from the community, where they can get some support from officers in the council to develop actions and proposals around that. So I'm really excited by it. And where it will lead and and what action will come out of it, I think will be really determined by the ambition of Drongan and the people of Drongan and the communities that are there. So really looking forward to that. Your other point about the action plans in schools, I think I can remember my presentation, the number, it was up to, we anticipate around 34 submissions from schools this year, and that's a big increase in the 19. So we are seeing that momentum building across our schools. And I should say that the first year, we only asked the schools to focus on 2 of the themes. But this year we're asking them to focus on all 4 themes. So we will see a real acceleration of the ambition and level of actions in our schools and in those action plans. Turning to Enerfit and Passive House, I see Simon has just popped up on the screen and he can explain that much better than I can. My layman's understanding of it is that they both try to achieve the same thing. It's a fabric first approach. Passive House is the new build standard, so how you build it new. Enerfit is the retrofit standard, and that's how you actually achieve the high insulation and low energy use heating in a retrofit. But Simon and colleagues can explain it much better than I can.
Thanks, through you, Chair. So James has just stolen my thunder. That's kind of what I was going to say, but broadly the same. And it's actually a very sort of simple idea, quite technically challenging to implement, but quite simple. And really it is to have a very thermally efficient envelope to your building. So high levels of insulation and high levels of air tightness. And essentially that then reduces the heat demand that the building requires. So it's 2 terms for 2 different types of construction. As James said, Passive House is the term for the new build process, and Enerfit is the term for the retrofit. They both have a target of energy consumption to reach those standards. It's a little bit more challenging for the new build, just because of the challenges of insulating and making existing buildings airtight, but broadly they're about the same. And so the St Sophia's project and the Doon project are very similar in that regard. It's to maximise the thermal efficiency of the building envelope to minimise the actual energy consumption that the building uses. And both those projects will use renewable energy sources in terms of the heating within the buildings. So yeah, that's the principle behind it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Thanks, James. Elaine, you want to come back in at all? No. Okay. Okay, Councillor Cogley. Your mic's off, Councillor Cogley.
Thank you. Just to come back on your point in relation to the EV charging points, this has been one of a number of queries that I've had from people who live in a terrace type house with no access to their property from the back. And the only way they could charge their electric vehicles was actually to put a charger through the window over the pavement and onto the road to the car. So that's the context in which my point was raised. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fair point, Sally, but it's all down to infrastructure again, isn't it? All down to the infrastructure. Okay, any other? Okay, Councillor Canning, then Councillor Mabin.
So it would be remiss not to thank Kimberly, Malcolm and Robert for showing some of the committee members around the recycling centre, which was really interesting. And if there are any geeks, that J-Plas is the contractor we use for plastic recycling after it leaves the recycling centre, and their website is really fascinating in terms of how plastic actually gets back into the system. I did make the comment today. It felt, for those that you can remember, it felt like being on Play School looking through the round window, but it was very interesting. So thanks.
Councillor Mabin first, then Councillor Richardson. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Mabin. Thanks, Peter. That's just a quick one, real quick. It was just back to EV charging. We drive a Mazda currently, which is basically, it's not quite a hybrid. It's basically playing at it. As you brake, it produces energy, etc. But it's still 90% unleaded petrol. Anyway, it'll be a couple of years before we change that one, but I've already did it. So I'm online seeing, because the next one will probably be fully electric, because most people are probably thinking about that at this point. All I would say is some of the deals that are out there seem to offer the installation of the home EV charging point as part of the package. So some of the dealerships and some of the manufacturers are already saying, well, we'll fling in the EV charging point at home as part of the deal.
That's good to know, Councillor Richardson. Thank you. Councillor Mabin.
Yep, thank you. And following from the last Governance and Scrutiny Committee, where David Mitchell advised us that there was no limit in the number of questions that we could be asking at Governance and Scrutiny. So I've got 14 questions. I don't know if anybody wants to take a break first. First of all, I'd like to thank Andrew Kennedy and James Lally. I've had phone conversations on some of these questions, and I've got some excellent answers, which I think it's good that they'll be sharing these answers with you. And repeat Stephen's thanks to the staff at Western Road. We did the tour of the Western Road Recycling Centre, which was excellent, very informative. First question really is, why is this report late? And I'm worried that proper governance and scrutiny perhaps couldn't happen because the numbers had to be sent in to the Scottish Government. And how does that affect, for example, if we had a real issue or a real umbrage with parts of this report, we couldn't have done a call-in because the numbers had to be sent. So I'll leave that to James and David to answer first.
Okay, David, you want to come in?
The bottom line is that obviously we have to abide by external deadlines. Colleagues can explain exactly why the timing in terms of this paper coming slightly after, but to be fair, as members can see, it's a beast of a paper. I think the comfort members need to understand is that in relation to call-in, well, to meet that external deadline, we use the wording of exempting the decisions that Cabinet are taken by Cabinet to approve the submission. Be exempt, it means that they don't need to be held up and implemented, but it doesn't preclude the call-in. And I think the fundamental point is, had it been called in, well, it didn't need to be because it's, as you and I discussed, but I forgot to identify it's actually on the agenda here. So it's not so much about calling, it was always known it was coming. And I think the bottom line is if through the scrutiny process here, any material flaw or inaccuracy was identified that hadn't been picked up at Cabinet or in the process of getting it to Cabinet, bearing in mind that this is the third layer of or round of scrutiny because a paper of this size comes to CMT, where colleagues apply a degree of scrutiny in terms of getting it right in the first instance. It goes to Cabinet, where again it is looked at, and one would hope that by then it's accurate. Whether or not it's perfect is a different matter, but it's accurate. But ultimately, the returns are such that I would expect that if we sat here today and said that figure's materially wrong, then we would submit a revised submission. We would create an amendment that would go into Scottish Government to say all of that stands, but it needs to be amended to that extent. So it's not a one-time only. Once we put it into Scottish Government, it is there for the deadline, but they obviously receive something of that nature from every council in Scotland, and it's not like they turn it around in a matter of weeks. They take time to produce that and analyse it and bring it up to any kind of national reporting level. So the bottom line is colleagues can explain why. You know, it didn't make perhaps the last GNS, but I suppose what I'm saying is that for all the formality, when you cut through it, it wouldn't really make any fundamental difference, because if there was any material inaccuracies in the submission that went away after Cabinet last week, it would still be capable of being picked up should you find anything. So it's not about neutering governance and scrutiny and saying, you can have a look, but if you find anything wrong with this, it's too late. We can still correct it, but you wouldn't hold up that whole submission and all of that content just to allow for that further possibility. So there is a balance, but in the actual timing of the report, I can only say on behalf of colleagues, it is a hell of a beast of a report to prepare, and the bigger they are, the longer they can take. And it's a bit trite, but I'll hand over to James if there's anything to add with regard to the actual process.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. I would just concur in terms of the nature of the report. The other thing to bear in mind is I mentioned in the presentation is that the guidance for this is provided by Sustainable Scotland Network, and they do not provide, or they do not complete the guidance for that until the end of the summer. So whilst we're reporting back for now the last year, 2021-22, we don't actually have the rules of engagement until late summer. And to actually then take the beast of the report, as David has described it, and actually drill down, look at how the methodology has changed and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes they introduce new categories, they change the way they're reporting some areas completely each year. It takes a while to interpret it, and we do try our best to get this, and I think we gave a commitment at Cabinet that we would try and get it to an earlier Cabinet, which would allow consideration by governance and scrutiny before the November deadline. But it is a very challenging timescale when you build in all of the scrutiny that this has to go through. There's also an audit of these figures by our internal audit service, which we have to build in and allow timescale for as well. So it's a complex and detailed task involving a range of officers across the council, and we do try our best to allow proper scrutiny. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you for the reply, the answers. I don't know if it's possible to add something into the recommendations that would try and get this earlier next time. I'm also appreciating that it is a beast of a paper, as you're saying. It's a huge subject that ranges over the whole council, every department almost, and would it actually deserve a governance and scrutiny committee on its own for the one paper?
I think they can.
If it helps to you, in the first point, the committee, anything the committee agrees can be built into the committee's minutes. Yeah, so absolutely, if the committee wants that, to express that as a view of committee, that you would wish, every effort would be made to have it sooner, then that's a decision that's obviously competent for the committee to take. And in terms, talked too long, forgot another point. In terms of having a standalone, that's entirely in the gift of the chair, because it's the function of the chair at the pre-meeting, the pre-agenda, to agree the presentation items and what comes and what doesn't. That tends to be a formality in terms of all chairs tend, I don't just mean this chair and this committee, tend to accept what's put in front of them, but it's a reasonable ask that can be taken on board the next time we're bringing it along. And it would be for the chair at that time to decide whether or not there would be merit in having a standalone meeting. And no doubt, again, we're talking about years' time, so anything can happen, but the chair at that time would probably want to take members' views on board when making that decision whether to have it as a standalone or not. So it's again in the gift of committee whether or not there's no one else telling you can't have it on a standalone. If that's what this committee decided, then that's what you can do.
Well, what's procedural then? I would make that a formal proposal. I need a seconder.
You would simply, I think, I don't know if you need one. I think there may be support, but yeah, you would simply just move, and we'll take it as having been moved. So the next question will go out to your colleagues whether there is a seconder, but we'll articulate that as having been moved. That we add an additional recommendation to the minute of this meeting on this item, which basically makes the request of this committee that every effort be made to have the paper here prior to the submission to Scottish Government in future years. And if you wish, and if it's the will of the committee, also to give consideration, just to get it on the record so we don't forget about it in a year's time, also to give consideration to the how this is presented to GNS, or to making alternative arrangements for its presentation to GNS so that GNS can do it justice. And we'll tighten up the wording, but I think that's what you're proposing. So it's really, unless anyone's otherwise minded, that would become the position of the committee. If anyone is otherwise minded, then we get into technicalities.
Okay, if we're all minded to have that built into the recommendation and minuted, then okay, yep, that's nodding hands, yes, that's an agreement. Okay, Peter, your next questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had problems with parts of the report. Parts of the report are excellent, and there's loads of brilliant information. I'm also thinking there's stuff missing that could have been in the report that would have been useful. Especially like making comparisons with what happened in the years before, and comparisons with other councils. That I'd like to get some feedback on this stuff with targets. On page 11, paragraph 6, we're talking about various targets. That the UK is a world leader. It's setting targets, and we're going to be net zero by 2050. It says in paragraph 6, so it's nice that the UK is a world leader, but then apparently you read paragraph 5, and the UK isn't a world leader because the Scottish Government has decided that we'll be net zero by 2045. So the Scottish Government is now trying to be the world leader on this. And then you go to paragraph 9 on the same page, and this council has signed up to UK 100, which is a strange name for it because it's actually 106 local authorities. And they've decided that we're going to be net zero by 2030. So in effect, they'll become the world leaders on setting targets. I'm now thinking that myself and my fellow councillors in Kilmarnock South could set another target, and we could be the world leaders in Kilmarnock South and set a target for 2028 or something. It's this use of targets which can't be met is really annoying. On page 33, we're paragraph 106, right at the bottom. We've been warned by COSLA that Holyrood's Net Zero Committee, Scotland will fail to meet its legal pledge to cut emissions by 75% by 2030. So, I mean, the targets they're setting, COSLA's already telling them you're not going to meet these targets. And then we've got into a bit of a carry on with the food waste, where we said we would do food waste recycling by 50% by 2026, and then that target has turned out to be wildly inaccurate as well. And instead of 50%, we've now set a new target of 15%. So this is really annoying that there's all these targets flying around and some of them are unachievable. And it's annoying. I don't know if you want to comment on the targets or on that, or if we I'll leave that there now, and then I want to talk more about food waste and how we're recycling there.
James?
Yep, thanks, Chair. I think you're right. It's a complex landscape, Councillor Mabin, and it's one that we tried to navigate and agree in our strategy in June 2021. I was equally confused when I first picked up this mantle of climate change. But the fact remains, the UK has set a target 2050. The Scottish Government has set a more ambitious target of 2045 to become net zero. And the Council has set a target for us to lead the way. And it's an aspirational target for the Council to be net zero by 2030. And if we don't set targets, we don't actually achieve them. As the strategy set out, when we actually approved that target, we actually didn't think we had the technologies in place to deliver on it. It was an aspirational target. As I've presented to members today, it's no longer an aspirational target. We actually know how to do it. The challenge is how we actually afford to do it, and can we, and how quickly can we do it. The paragraph that you point out in relation to COSLA is, I suppose, the pressure that is now coming from local government to tell our national governments that we can't deliver this on our own. And it's how I concluded the presentation. We can't do this on our own because we don't actually have the finances to do it. And we really need to look at how we resource net zero. The Scottish Government has actually set up an independent body, and there is a review going on into the support that the Scottish Government is giving local government to meet these targets that the Scottish Government has imposed on councils. And the outcome of that, I'm sure, will reflect COSLA's response that you highlighted. It's not a simple it's not a simple process, but I think the whole thing about this is to actually have aspirational targets and to actually encourage action and focus minds on what needs to be done. And that's exactly what this report is intended to do. In relation to your specific points on the food waste, I think, again, we set very aspirational targets. I mentioned in my presentation, I think to achieve a 10% reduction year on year on the amount of food waste in our landfill, given that 40% of our landfill waste was food waste, would have actually been, I can't remember the actual figure, I'd need to check with Malcolm, but it would be a 3,000 times increase in what we actually collected in the year. And it hadn't been properly scrutinised. And I'll hold my hands up to that. And I can't actually recall where that target came from. But I think the experience today is shown us, and from our phase one of the food campaign, has shown us that we're not going to make that transformational change. We're not going to deliver that without the support of our communities. And we do need to be a bit more realistic. The new targets, I think, that have been agreed, the 5%, I think are still extremely challenging. And actually had discussions with colleagues in cleaner, greener communities about that. But I think we need to set these ambitious targets around climate change. If we sit in our laurels and do nothing, or set targets that are easily achievable, then we won't have the proper response to the climate change emergency. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it certainly does. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Mabin. Councillor Richardson, you're just going to come in the back of that point just quickly. Okay.
No, really quickly. Peter, I think the whole world, its population, probably shares your anger really with regards to targets, because you just have to look at COP and the world leaders can't agree what to do in this issue, and it's probably the biggest issue facing humans during our lifetime. And but all I would say is that from the report is, at least at local, we're a local authority, we're a small part of Scotland, but we seem to be doing as much as we can possibly do. as a local authority. But really, for this issue to be dealt with, it's going to take world leaders, mate, to start agreeing today serious things at COP level. Because I agree with you, when I'm watching the news, the 6 o'clock news, and you see that it's not been taken as seriously as it should be taken. I share your anger, mate, and I hear where you're coming from, but I wouldn't get too hung up on the fact that there's different targets to be met. I just think it's pretty good that we, a small local authority, a small part of Scotland, we seem to be doing everything that we can do at our level, everything that's under our control. So that was just my point.
Okay, Councillor Maiden.
Take your point, Councillor Richardson, but I'm afraid I don't agree. I think we can do much more. Can I ask about this UK 100 group, and what do they do? Are they having meetings? Is there feedback from them? Are they sharing best practice, or is it simply a group who have made a pledge together?
It's actually a bit of both. It's a group of councils that have made a pledge together to be and to reach that ambitious target. And there are a range of workshops and events held throughout the year, and information shared across all of the members that promote some of the best practice across a whole range of issues. I can certainly ask for you to be added to the mailing list, so as you see some of the things that the membership of UK 100 opens up access to us. There's a number of officers and members are already added to that list, and it really is that commitment from the leaders of those councils to meet the 2030 target and how they achieve it. There's lots going on across, we're all grappling with the same issue, and there's lots of good practice and learning that we can promote. Simon mentioned some of that we're working in partnership with a number of councils around Enerfit and Passive House, looking at how it's applied to different buildings and sharing that across, I think, six Scottish authorities. And that's something that we will share that learning again through UK 100. So there's lots of good practice out there and lots of information sharing.
Thanks, James. Linda, you want to come in?
Yeah, and I know it's quite rare for an officer to come in, but I actually do want to just add something into this on top of what's going on in regards to the report. Can we say that in education, we see there's a huge amount that we can do? Because as we know, folks, very often in households, if the young people are doing something, and I'm going back to the bin juice bit that I have to say, I'm still smiling at, but I'm still going back there. We actually do think that young people can affect an awful lot of this change, because very often they can change the habits of both parents, aunties, uncles, and indeed grandparents by going to their houses and actually, advising them what they've seen in school. The other big opportunity that I think we see in education around about this, because I can totally see, the bit about what else can we do that's been expressed, but I think also there's a curriculum review going on in Scottish education right now, and we'll remember home economics back in the day, I'm quite sure, with great fondness, where the first lesson that you ever took was to make a cheese and tomato sandwich. That was certainly mine, and actually when we think about it now, the main things we should be doing are actually around about the economics, which are, saving food before it goes off, making things in bulk, all of these types of things. So at this point in time, we're actively inputting. I'm on one of the CCG groups, having these exact discussions about how do we actually model the change in terms of what we teach young people. So rather than, actually the making of a certain item or baking this or doing that, how do we actually encourage sustainable behaviours, both in the household from a food waste perspective? Now, that's only one example in home economics, but equally that's got to be applied throughout the curriculum. So I think as we evolve and as we change our planning in education alongside James and colleagues who are an integral part of our planning, I also think through you, Chair, that this is actually a really fundamental change that we need to encourage through our young people as well, and actually express that holistically in planning. So I think there's good points being made about what more can we do, but actually I think some of the more we can do sits in other services plans as well. So thanks for that, Chair.
No, that's helpful, Linda. Peter, you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if our council has any redress about going back to Holyrood and asking the Scottish Government for more money, or if it's a closed book, there is no way to do that. Well, a number of councils have announced their own ambitious net zero targets. COSLA said hitting continued cuts to local authority core funding are putting targets at risk. Hitting emission targets will require the investment of new resources and remedial work to address many years of local government funding cuts. Can we go back to the Scottish Government and ask them for money, for more money, as COSLA are also urging, or are COSLA already asking for more money, and the Scottish Government are just ignoring us?
James, you want to come in?
COSLA are already asking for more money, and I think that's through the negotiations. In terms of going back to the Scottish Government, again, as David says, that's at the liberty of the decision making of this committee.
Councillor Richardson.
I've got to come back in that one. As we all know, the Scottish Government works within a fixed budget. Under the terms of devolution, we've got to balance the budget. We've got pay settlements to be made. I think John Swinney himself has said at this point that there is no extra money, Peter. Now, if you want the Scottish Government to have all of the fiscal levers in its power to govern Scotland the way probably me and you would probably want to see it governed, then there's only one way that's going to happen, Peter, and it's no when we live off the crumbs for Westminster's table.
Okay, folks, if you just stick to the climate change paper, okay?
Just to assist, I think the short answer to that particular point is any council, I suppose, in theory, can make an ask of Scottish Government for more money, but in the current climate, it wouldn't be with an expectation of a positive response, because the rhetoric, the information is all out there in the public domain. So I'm trying not to make any kind of political comment, but the fundamental position is, and members have had the benefit, and we've still got East Ayrshire performance to come, of understanding, and Joe and Julie and others do a great job in keeping members and the rest of us awake at night with the worries about the budget and the overall positions. So you wouldn't pick necessarily one issue like climate change out and make the specific ask. This will all come to a head over budget setting. But I think there's not a council in Scotland that might not have the appetite to make the ask for more money. But I don't know that any council in Scotland should have any legitimate expectation that there's any more money to be had. And I would just leave it at that. From an officer perspective, obviously, it's up to the members if they want to carry on with that point. But I think, as I said, the answer is we could ask, but I don't think there's any expectation it would be responded to positively as a position.
Okay, thanks, David. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. On food waste, there's one of the ideas I'm really not sure if it is a good idea. We're talking about putting stickers and bin hangers on food waste bins. Food waste bins aren't presented. I'm a big fella. There's not much food waste in my house, and sometimes I don't put out a food waste bin because there really isn't much, and there's not much point in putting it out. Or I can get the wee green bag out of the food waste bin and I can drop it in one of the other ones that are already there in the street. So now I'm going to get a hanger placed on my bin telling me to present my food waste bin when I really don't need to. And that hanger is going to go in the bin. So we're printing paper hangers to put on bins that are going to go in the bin, effectively. I'm not sure it's a great idea, to be honest.
I think my take on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, James, is it's education. It's about educating the public. And it's not about targeting people who would normally put their bins out. It's about targeting the ones that don't, and it's to educate them. But I could be wrong. James, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I could just say, see that wee one with a wee bit in it? Put that in your food bin. We want absolutely every scrap of food waste in that food bin, and that's the behaviour change that we're trying to encourage. I appreciate your point about creating more waste, but it's a really effective way. And as we saw in the first phase of the food waste campaign, 200% increase in requests for food caddies. People have lost them. They've chucked them away. They don't have them anymore. it refocuses minds, and we're also doing a dual messaging on the tag as well, so it will have information on cost of living and the cost of living crisis, and directing people to support. So that will be the reverse side. One side's food waste and the other side's on the cost of living crisis. And again, that's an effective way of getting that messaging out. So appreciate we're creating waste, but I would encourage, even if you've got a tiny bag of that is unavoidable food waste, potato peelings, carrot peelings, all sorts of things, and we want to encourage absolutely all food waste to be recycled. When you think 40% of what we put in that residual bin, the weight, is actually food waste, we really need every scrap in the food waste bin, and that's the messaging.
So that includes tea bags, eggshells, apple cores, that kind of stuff. Everything. Do you have any more questions, Peter?
Oh, aye, loads, Chair. I got annoyed with we were looking at the young people providing leadership. I forget what paragraph it's in. It's brilliant to communicate with the young folk. It's their future and their children and grandchildren. So absolutely, we should be doing these conferences and getting the communication going. Looking to them for leadership, I'm no sure is the right choice of phrase to use. It's obvious that the young people themselves are looking for us to leadership. And page 27, paragraph 80, they're talking about the decision makers are not doing enough. So us as decision makers at this level, we need to do more. And actually calling the young people leaders themselves doesn't sit well with me. We should be leading by example. And there's places where we're not doing well. This paper itself has got stuff printed in it in triplicate. We've got the same information 3 times on. We've got it on page. There's a graph there about our landfill and what we're recycling. We've got the same information on page 23, on page 60, and on page 79. So we're printing the same stuff 3 times. The appendix 2 that we've printed is 19 pages. I don't like it. There's loads of empty boxes. There's information repeated. There's font sizes we can't flaming read because it's too tiny. And then for some reason, we managed to print that appendix 2 twice. So we've got 19 pages printed twice for everybody. And I don't know why. We're wasting energy, we're wasting paper, we're wasting printer ink. And some poor soul's been standing at a printer for half a day, printing all this stuff that we really don't need.
Okay.
So us as leaders, we need to do better.
Do you have any more questions, Peter?
Yeah, loads.
Right. Okay.
We'll start. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that first.
Linda.
Thanks, Councillor Mabin, and if I can absolutely come in, I take your point around the leadership of young people, but I think that the young people don't feel that the leaders do enough, and that's what they're expressing to us at the climate change conference, and therefore really, as they've seen, through the likes of, Greta Thunberg, etc., they've seen the power of young people and their collective thinking, and that's something that, clearly I know that you encourage and we all encourage in the room. When we talk about leadership, it happens in so many levels for young people, and we talk about leadership in their own classrooms, we talk about leadership in their own year groups at school, we talk about pupil councils, and then when we bring that to our corporate level colleagues, we talk about our children and young people's cabinet, and indeed the fact we've got MSYPs, out there doing that. So I think really the young people identify, I feel that, there is a disconnect between their hopes and aspirations for the planet and what's possibly playing out on the national and international stage. So when we talk about the leadership of young people, I think it's about embracing their ideas and their concepts and indeed their enthusiasm. But I think, as I mentioned before, that power they've got, you know, when they're at their grannies or their aunties and saying, oh, that goes in the food bin, you know. So I think it's that bit where, you know, clearly they can also really affect adult change. It's a bit like when young people, when we speak about, you know, parking campaigns, you know, they are able to lead. And it's, I suppose, about the context that you're questioning there, Councillor Mabin, of that leadership. But I think they're disappointed in what they've seen on the international stage, thus the whole movement that's occurred through climate change. I think they've seen that they can seize power, which again is a fantastic thing for them to understand democracy in its widest sense. So really, just from a young person's perspective, that's my own take on the leadership and indeed their desire to be involved, if that's at all helpful.
Councillor Richardson.
Just to come back to Linda on that, and I agreed with a lot of what she said there. Just on Greta Thunberg, there's an example of a young person really wanting to get involved and really lead. But as politicians, or no, just as an individual, what really annoyed me was the way that certain world leaders actually try, and you also used the phrase there, Linda, young people could seize power. What really worried certain world leaders was the fact that Greta was maybe saying a wee bit too much, and there was a media campaign to discredit the young lady. And as a politician, Peter, I hear a lot of what you're saying, mate, but young people need to be encouraged to get involved. But we've got world leaders that when somebody was getting really involved, they immediately set the dogs on her. And as politicians, we should worry about that.
Councillor Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to commend the officers and all the departments and all the work that's been done so far, and some of the great steps forward that have been made in terms of the work that's been done towards the net zero targets. Just getting back to Councillor Mabin's point about Appendix 2, I couldn't agree more. I think the point he's made about the size of the fonts, etc., and the amount of paper that has been wasted is entirely correct. So I'd like to back him up on that point.
David,
yeah, apologies, Chair. I was just double checking there, and as Councillor Mabin's correctly said, and credit to Councillor Mabin, because I don't know if it was repeated at Cabinet when this was issued to Cabinet, and it was issued twice, but unfortunately the fold-out, as it were, has been duplicated. So for that one, I can only apologise. Clearly that's oversight. There would be no purpose to be achieved by deliberately copying it twice. I think it just proves the point that sometimes less is more with appendices. And that's a matter that's been raised recently at Cabinet with what happened last week, when what was actually put in and approved in front of Cabinet was the Scottish Government guide to making the SHIP submission rather than the SHIP submission that was being approved. So I've actually raised this at Cabinet pre-agenda this week, where we were able to remove 50 pages from a 400-page pre-agenda in the form of one consultancy report that was more of a background paper to one paper. And I've made the point at CMT with colleagues that we need to get back to a tighter approach. This is something that comes around cyclically. There is a committee report template, and that includes consideration of what not just goes in a report, but what should be appendices. And I think we just need to remind colleagues of the difference between previous reports and background papers, and make better use of background papers. Background papers are documents that inform the report you have in front of you, but don't necessarily need direct approval. Therefore, that's why they're classed as background papers. They can go on the portal for reference for those members who wish to have that deeper dive. But the whole point is the reports that officers put in front of members should be self-contained. And if they are asking for approval of appendices, then obviously they need to come. So we are looking to refresh things with our CMT colleagues and to take a stricter line at the future pre-meetings in terms of going back to pre-COVID times. There's been a bit of a tendency. I know you can blame COVID for everything, but if you remember that at the very outset of COVID, we basically within a week set aside all previous committee arrangements introduced the concept of the executive committee and just set about trying to make that work. But we're out of COVID now, we're reverting back to previous ways of operating, and that means going back to some of the previous standards in terms of the preparation of the reports and consideration of these kind of matters as to what else needs to come. Having said that, there is always occasions when colleagues will feel that something is of such importance that it does merit being put there. But as I said, I think we need to get back to a stronger line whereby, you know, what is the purpose of an appendix? And if it's not there for approval, what does it add to the report that's not already in the report? So on the point it's been duplicated, I can only apologise. If that goes down to the print room, not picking that up, then I'll take that one. With regard to the need to include it, then I think that's open for debate, and it's obviously something this committee can take a view on. James will no doubt have his own view. I think folk can see the merit in principle of being cited on something that is only an annual return. But I take your point, that's actually, you know, of such small print and legibility that does it actually add any value to the paper. So I think that's one for colleagues to take away in terms of the content preparation and presentation of the next iteration of this. But general terms, this is something through Democratic Service colleagues at pre-meetings and at CMT, I'm starting to try and remind and get us back to where we were. It's not always been the case where every agenda seemed to need to be in excess of 400 pages.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to what David said, apologies for that oversight. I hadn't noticed it myself, Councillor Maven. This report, as I said, was trying to do is a dual purpose, so that there will naturally be some repetition. Some of the stuff that's in Appendix 1 in our action plan will actually appear in the Appendix 2 in similar text. And that's deliberate because we're trying to actually do two things at once and kind of join them together and make it make more sense and more and help people understand. The report, and we've gone back to Scottish Sustainability Networks about the spreadsheet. It's complex, it's clunky, you can't change some fields, and there's some discussion with colleagues in the energy team and colleagues at Scottish Sustainability Networks around that issue. It was actually discussed at the inquiry that I talked about how we actually present this. I completely agree with all of your points. I think maybe in future what we would look to do, because this is a document that is meant to be interrogated electronically rather than in print, and I think what we would maybe do is put it on the members portal and seek approval rather than actually append it as a document, because it is very complex and difficult to read when it's printed out. And I appreciate your point about the paperwork associated with this report as well. So something we'll consider for future. Thanks.
Thanks, David and James. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on a wee bit to look at recycling and the struggles I had trying to make comparisons if we're doing well or if we could be doing better. Appendix 2 is page 60 in the papers. For example, batteries recycling, we recycled 11 tonnes of batteries. Glass recycling, we recycled 3,417 tonnes of glass. My struggle is that good or is that bad? Could we be doing better? How many tonnes of batteries did we recycle last year or the year before? How many tonnes of glass did we recycle last year or the year before? Where's the comparison with the other councils and our group of councils? I know we're in a group that compares us with North Ayrshire, South Ayrshire, Falkirk, Dundee and somewhere else that I can't remember. Where's the comparisons there? Are they doing better? Could we learn from them? Or is the likes of North Ayrshire doing recycling twice as many batteries and we could learn something from them? I'm struggling to get the comparisons and judge how well we're doing or how poorly we're doing. I don't know.
No, that's a fair point. Do we have any comparable information, James?
Chair, that will be covered in the annual waste report. What this report is trying to do is to bring together a multitude of different work streams and provide a summary of it. In the annual waste review report and figures that are submitted to the Scottish Government by colleagues in waste. All of that information will be in that and in more detail. I have actually had a chat with Malcolm just following the discussion with Councillor Eamon yesterday about some of the specifics here. And we used to be, I think, in the top 1 or 2. East Renfrewshire have always been top in terms of the recycling. We have slipped back. I think that COVID has had an impact. I think we're now in number 12 in terms of overall recycling in Scotland. That has primarily been down to the introduction of the charge for the garden waste, because we're not collecting as much garden waste now. A lot of that's been composted at home, which is good for the environment, but that actually reduces the overall tonnage and then the percentage of waste that is recycled. That, as I say, that's not really the purpose of this report, and that will be going into in much more detail in the annual waste performance report. But hopefully that gives a bit of flavour. One of the issues that's always fascinated me is that councils actually get credit for collecting essentially the water and garden waste. So if you collect your garden waste weekly, then it retains the water and weighs much more, and that actually improves your recycling, whereas we let it dehydrate and we only collect it every 3 weeks, and that actually reduces our recycling performance perversely. But there are a whole range of factors around recycling that I'd be happy to come and have a chat with you about. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Thank you. Okay, Peter, we're just about.
Thank you. That's excellent answer. Moving on again, buildings and the amount of energy we use. I'm guessing there's the 3 biggest council buildings would be this building we're in at London Road, and probably the Bond and the Opera House. And then you would add in probably the 9 big secondary schools. I don't know if there's any others, if these figures also take in East Ayrshire Leisure, if we're also taking the energy at Dean Castle, Dick Institute, if these come into these figures as well. And what are we going to do in the future to reduce the amount of energy that we use? Because one of my concerns is the likes of this building here, that the janitors are in probably 7:30 every morning and put on every light and switch on the central heating for a building that is half empty, because we have so many people who are still working at home. So we need to do better on reducing the amount of energy that we use, and I don't know what that's happening in other places as well. Also, with looking at the schools, we've had the schools with doors open and windows open for a year or more because of the COVID crisis, to let air movement flow through. Now that's costing us in energy and money for heating our schools. Do we now consider that the COVID pandemic is more or less settled down and everyone's got their vaccinations? Can we now close windows and doors and fire doors and try and keep our classrooms warmer and save some energy and save some money instead of letting the heat escape out of windows? Thank you.
I'll pass it to David Dorrance for safety.
Councillor Maben, yeah, I think it's right to say that for the most part we're out of the COVID pandemic, but COVID is still prevalent in communities. We're still seeing people infected by COVID. And what's more important is that we still have the duty of care that we've always had to staff and pupils and people in their schools. And a vital component of making sure that people stay safe is to ensure that there's air dilution. So, well, I would agree with you that the vaccination program's made a big difference, and we have come out to a great extent the other side of COVID. I would be cautious in terms of putting out any sort of communications to staff that they need to close windows and doors and prevent that ventilation, because it's still a key component, not just of COVID, but norovirus and rhinovirus and other viruses that are going out the winter as well. So air dilution is a vital component in making sure that we reduce the risks.
Thanks, David.
Chair, so just a quick, I'm not going to prolong things, but just to give members some assurance that whether it's George and the 2 caretakers or Robert and the council officers, when they come in the heating is set, the heating, I believe, and members have colleagues have raised concerns about the heating, but it's been explained to me that it's the hot water in the pipes, and even after you've stopped heating the hot water, it's still going down the pipes. So that's why the building can be hard to control in here in terms of it always seems to be too hot or too cold. But the officers don't go around and put the lights on in the morning, as members will know, and I've been in here myself of an evening. The lights are set automatically, so in the corridors they go off after a period of time, then they're triggered by motion. And in most other parts of the building, the lights are left for those going into offices to put their own lights on. So we're not setting this up like Blackpool Illuminations of a morning, but I accept this building is getting heated, obviously, as are indeed all council buildings. But just in terms of the comment about putting all the lights on, that's not the case of a morning. So hope that helps.
I'm just going to bring in Councillor Watts. Okay. Neil.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the food waste campaign, can I suggest that when we start that, we make it easier for people to be able to order replacement caddies or even the food bag liners, the green liners. Looking on the council website, it doesn't make it easy with a link to anywhere. You can look on the food waste page, tells you what to put in there, tells you where to get replacement liners, but it doesn't tell you how to get replacement bins, and there's no links. And then when you click on the links to where you get the replacement liners from, it takes you to the various centres, but half of them say they're still closed because of COVID. So I think we need to roll something that makes it easier for people to get hold of the green liners for the caddies, but also if they need to get replacement caddies, etc., there should be links and forms that are easy to find online to be able to do it. Thank you, Chair.
That's a good point, Councillor Watts. I agree we should keep things simple for people. Okay, Councillor Richardson.
Through you, Lillian, through you, Chair. But just back to Councillor Watts. Neil, it's dead easy to get the green bags. Now, I don't know if this is the guys that do North West Kilmarnock out in the van, out in the lorry that do this off their own back, or whether this is council policy. All you do is you take one of your green bags, you tie it round the handle of your caddy, and see when you pick your bag up after they've emptied it, there's a big roll of green bags sitting beside your caddy. That's how you get the green bags, mate. You take one bag, tie it round the handle of your caddy. When you go to get your bin, there's a big roll of green bags sitting there waiting for you. And that's really simple.
Okay, Councillor Watts, you coming back in?
Yeah, no, I hear what Councillor Richardson's saying. I understand that. But if someone's lost a caddy, they haven't got a caddy, how are they going to start off from scratch? So, you know, if you haven't got the caddy there to start with, you can't tie the handle.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Watts. Okay, Peter, you've got another question.
Thank you, Chair. Just getting back to buildings, the amount of people who are working from home and some of our buildings not been fully utilised. Is it getting to a stage now we've got too many buildings and we need to look at the amount of energy we're using?
Just to confirm that there is some paper coming forward in the corporate office accommodation strategy between now and budget time in February. So that's always kept under review. It was last discussed at CMT in the last couple of months. And yeah, as you would expect, there needs to be emerging proposals to rationalise the overall buildings and the ownership of the council, recognising, as you've said, even before COVID, we were moving towards smarter working. COVID's accelerated that. We've moved directly to working from home, and everyone has their own view and the pros and cons of that. My own view is it can't just be applied in principle. You have to have regard to the nature of the work each of us does, and that might vary for some folk one day to the next. So your arrangements can vary. But I think what we can't lose sight of when people are making the decisions about work from home, work in the office, is the actual activities they're undertaking at any given time and where are they best placed carried out. And the answer to that can be entirely different. I've got a team of debt recovery paralegals up the stairs, and for one of them, the answer is quite simple. The Wi-Fi signal's so slow at home, it takes them 20 minutes to do at home what they can do in 5 minutes in the office. So they make their decisions based on that. And we just need, I think, across the piece to get the balance right in terms of people being focused. It's not just a straight choice of where do I fancy sitting today in front of my computer, but what am I actually having to do and where can I most effectively do it? And maybe it's about, you know, planning the week ahead, having meetings and concentrating them and then getting a couple of quieter days at home. The concept of taking time at home to do work that needs quiet time was not new, even before smarter working, never mind before working from home. But in general terms, there's a paper coming forward that will set out for approval by council proposals for future use under the corporate office accommodation strategy in terms of rationalising between the property here, Civic North, Civic South, Opera House and JWB, and that is in preparation. And you'll have sight of that in due course. Whether it comes to Cabinet Accounts, I can't remember at the moment, but there is a paper coming forward to do exactly that, seek approval to reduce the number of buildings we're currently using, recognising, of course, that as soon as we decide not to use a building, it immediately becomes a different kind of challenge in terms of how do you repurpose that building and how do we avoid putting any council buildings onto the list of empty buildings in any town centre in East Ayrshire. But that's the challenge, and that paper will seek to address that.
That's helpful, David. Thank you. Peter, you want to come back?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for that answer. It is helpful, and I see it in page 17, paragraph 33 is exactly what you've been talking about there. We continue to operate all buildings where staff who are working from home are based. So I look forward to your paper coming out soon that'll address this issue and put some recommendations. The amount of energy we used is 21 million kilowatts. That's in page 16, paragraph 27, the table. And the amount of gas is down a wee bit. We're at 43 million kilowatts. There isn't a monetary value in that. I mean, the money involved must be eye-watering. And if we can get these energy levels down, obviously that gives us money to use in other ways to try and affect climate change.
Sorry, I just think, just for some confirmation, I think our energy is bulk bought, is that right? So the energy we're using just now is based on prices that we had entered into, is that right?
Yeah, there are national contracts in place for energy consumption, electricity and gas, and in essence, yeah, you book them far enough in advance that you secure them at the price at the time you book them. So at the moment we're still in, and there was a notification came through from Scottish Government. I think that framework for those providers has just been extended as well. So those public sector bodies that are subscribing to that aren't yet feeling the full impact in terms of the price increases. But clearly that is a major challenge that will come whenever the current arrangements come to their natural contractual end.
Sorry, can you clarify, does East Ayrshire Council purchase its energy in advance, or is the Scottish Government buying it for us?
Scottish Government operates a framework contract that we purchase through.
All right, I see. Thank you. Moving on again. Thank you. Inspired Energy are doing a review on the energy consumption that we're doing. What is Inspired Energy? Who are they? I take it they're consultants of some kind. I'm not sure. And how much is it costing us to bring Inspired Energy and do this review for us?
Thanks, Chair. I think Magnus Dowie or Simon may be able to answer that.
Yes, Magnus Dowie here, I'll answer that one. Inspired Energy are a bureau service the council has. They have had it since 2008. We brought a paper the 1st of June this year to Cabinet regarding extension to that contract. The purpose of what they do is to analyse our ongoing energy billing, look for correct error, and validate those bills. They also act as a sort of data handling to pull all our consumption data together from our half-hourly meter estate to produce the data that we use for conversion to carbon for climate change and other things. So they're performing a management function around that on behalf of the council. We have negotiated with them between now and 2030 to extend the contract to 2030. And that's at around £25,000 a year. I would mention in the last 3 years alone, they have recovered 159,000 of utility billing errors. They have corrected them and we've been credited the money back. There is still a significant degree of error in utility billing that we get from our suppliers. So it remains a really valid sort of test and check, and it is paying for itself in terms of the recovery, more than paying for itself in terms of the recoveries we're getting back from our utility suppliers. Thank you.
Thanks, Magnus. Okay, so it seems to be worthwhile, Peter. It's paying for itself to ensure that we're being...
Thank you for that, Magnus. Excellent answer, and it looks like it's a worthwhile thing to do. Thank you for the extra information. Education, Linda, hiya. We're Fuel Free Friday, I think, is a great idea. Brilliant. Can you tell us about Walking to the Moon and why the other one was dropped and we're doing Walking to the Moon instead? Also, page 44, I've got we're going to pay 110,000 for a principal teacher to do Fuel Free Friday and Walking to the Moon and to help with the kids. Is that a wage to a principal teacher, or is that's a budget for a principal teacher to use to push this campaign? Is that the idea? Can you tell us a wee bit about that, please?
I think, thanks through you, Chair, Councillor Mayben, good points. I think I'll definitely point out 110k is not the wage of a principal teacher. To absolutely answer that question, I'm sure PTs everywhere are wishing it was, but no, that's not that. But I'm going to pass to James, who's got the information on the budget that's allocated there and the reasons behind the change around about to Walking to the Moon. So I'll bring James in. Thanks, Chair.
Yep. Thanks, Chair. So all of this was discussed through the Member Officer Working Group in Climate Change. The original proposal, Beat the Street, was a private company that came in and they put in fobs. It's a kind of fob thing, and they do a competition to encourage kids to be more active and actually walk to school. When we drilled down into the detail of it, it was only going to last for 6 weeks. And it was only going to be in Kilmarnock and Cumnock was the two areas that they could do. And what we thought was that in terms of the climate change funding, value for money, we could get much better bang for our buck by bringing this in-house. There's some of the schools that had already participated in the awards were doing this sort of thing, and we thought that we could roll that out across the council and cover all of our schools, and that was when we decided to bring it in-house and do the Walk to the Moon initiative. The new principal teacher's just been appointed, and she will not only lead on that particular project, but have a wider overview of climate change initiatives across schools. So we'll get much better value for money than that. There will be other costs associated with the initiative and actually promoting it, and that's what the budget will cover. So much better value for money, much more effective.
Thanks, James. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just continuing on the education frame, about litter picking in the schools, and there's some good work getting done, which I take it you're going to spread out to try and get it done in every school. I don't know if Councillor Cogley wants to come in on this as well. For litter picking in the schools is a great idea. One of my problems is it's outside the school. I've come on Academy and it keeps getting brought up at Newfoundland Community Council about litter between the school and the local shops. at Grashard Road, at Macphail Drive, at Lindsay Drive. So they're picking up a litter in the schools and they're doing well in the schools. But when they leave the school on their breaks, and their lunch breaks, and after school, we're getting a trail of litter to each one of the local shops. And our community councils are sick fed up reporting it. Another thing I'd like to ask about is fly tipping. The costs associated with fly tipping. I'm reporting fly tipping. Every week there's someone else reporting more fly tipping somewhere else, and I've got to report it to officers and get our greener communities to go and pick it up. And the costs involved with that, sending a van out to pick up all this stuff, it's irritating. I'll leave that there for now and get some answers. Thank you.
James.
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Cogley will be aware we've been working closely with her and around the initiative. I think COVID did delay the rollout of it, and what we've now done is we've reviewed the whole arrangements of the scheme, and we're about to reinvigorate and relaunch that across all of our schools. There's a meeting planned in the next couple of weeks that will bring colleagues across a range of services together to promote this initiative, and my own trainees will be involved in going out and promoting that within schools. Yeah, Natasha and Steph will be involved in that. So you will see some action. Our schools work very closely with our communities. We know it's an issue, and we do very well in primary schools. But I think once we get to secondary schools, the behaviour change that we instil it seems to be problematic, and that's where this scheme and the application of it is designed to try and change that behaviour. We've also got some investment across the schools, and we've done a pilot in Loudon just about the type of bins that we have in schools and around the area. It kind of exits the schools so as to try and discourage littering in the community. And I know that we do some work with local fast food areas, and that they have their own responsibilities in terms of picking up litter within a range of the area that they sell, and that's part of their licensing arrangements. But appreciate that we're never going to crack this issue with a single approach, and that there's a lot of work going across a range of services to address this matter.
Thanks, James. Can you bring in Councillor Cogley?
Thank you. Peter, thank you very much for raising it. And I think that as elected members, probably every single one of us gets asked about litter on a fairly regular basis, litter, dog fouling and fly tipping. I referred to the Scottish Government consultation, which I've suggested I take up separately with James, because we should have been getting some feedback and some action as a result of that, and it's gone extremely quiet. So we will revigorate that one. In terms of schools and where we go with schools, 4 years ago, we commenced a programme that was to be rolled out into all of the primary schools and all of the secondary schools. Obviously, two different training or educational programmes as appropriate for the respective educational establishments. And once we'd got the programme up and running, piloted, and the feedback was very good from the schools that we rolled this out into, and we then commenced work in the first educational group, which included the Grange Academy educational group, so that was the primary schools and the secondary school, and then we were into COVID, so the programme was kind of shut down. Now, in the meantime, I then worked very closely with Hill Head Primary School, who designed a fabulous presentation, which is now going to be updated and issued to all of our primary schools. And alongside that, we will be relaunching the secondary school programme. And James has referred to it. This will be going out at some point before Easter into our secondary schools. It's the timing was too tight to get it out before Christmas. And once we've gone past Easter, we're then into the exam timetable. So it's not really appropriate to be doing it then, but we will be going out into secondary schools during the course of next term. And it's basically the principles are quite straightforward. We are trying to deter our children from being given fixed penalty notices for littering and the age of criminal liability for children in respect of litter is 12. So any child over the age of 12 could get a criminal prosecution for littering, and we want to prevent that. And that is the message that we issue to our schools through this particular programme. So it's extremely frustrating that we do still have this problem and that it's an ongoing problem. We can all see our roadsides and the messes on the grass verge. The big way into this is through education, and that's what we can do locally. But we need we need far more help nationally in terms of a national programme, and that's a drum that I am just constantly banging. So thank you, but thank you for raising it.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. Okay, Peter, do you have any more questions?
I've 3 more,
Okay.
but we're gradually getting there.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cogley, and I wish you the best of luck with your campaign. I hope it makes a real difference in our secondary schools. Transport. We are providing school bus transport for children and how long are we going to keep going providing school transport for children? Because we're running half-empty buses. These are using diesel fuel mostly, and the Scottish Government has now given a free bus pass to every child. So we've now got parents who don't qualify for free school transport. They are paying a sum for school transport, and now they really don't want to use it because there is a free bus pass. There's huge problems with this. I note that Kevin Redwood is going to do a consultation with Stagecoach. So when's the results of that consultation going to come through, and we can make some decisions to possibly save the council some money and save some energy?
You raise a good point, Councillor Mayburn, but I think the council has an obligation for certain pupils for school transport.
If it would help, I'm maybe straying off piste a bit, but Linda will keep me right. But in terms of just helping members understand the background to this, the position is as described. I know another member raised it recently in correspondence, and I know Transport colleagues responded to that. At the time, the council does, as you say, Chair, have a statutory obligation to provide that transport for pupils who are certain distances beyond from the school, or beyond certain distances from the school. I have to figure 3 miles for secondary schools, and I think it's 1 mile for primary schools. So as a starting point, if we have pupils who are allocated or going to certain schools and they're out with either of those distances, then we have to fulfil our duty to get them to school. To rely on the public service then it was never the case. Before you get to the free passes, it was never the case that you would rely on the school, because the time is never right in terms of the normal public services. So the starting point is every council across the country has always been in the position of arranging through contractual arrangements private buses or privately paid buses paid for by the council to fulfil our legal duty to those pupils who are beyond those minimum or maximum travelling distances as set by Scottish Government. So that's your starter for 10. If they're beyond that, we need to bus them in at our cost. That might be for a whole variety of reasons. It reflects the fact that if the provision there's and the pupil there, and you don't have the need or the ability or the resources to put the provision there, then you bring the pupil to the provision. It might be where it's not where there's a placing request, it's where they fall in the catchment area. This council actually applied a higher standard for a long time, since its inception in '96. So for many years, the council operated to a higher standard and applied buses for a shorter distance than the statutory. I think latterly we did take the decision to get to or nearer that statutory distance, and it was at Cabinet that consideration was then asked to be given, not to the ones who are entitled to the free transport before we got free bus passes, but the ones who were within the catchment area but felt that made the argument, well, if you've got buses going by that the council's paying for the pupils that are beyond the 3 miles, and if there's empty seats in those buses, and if those buses are driving past our kids standing at a public bus stop, then doesn't it make sense to, even on a subsidised basis, make those available seats available to the non-entitled pupils so that they're actually getting the opportunity to get on the same bus but at their cost, because they don't have a legal entitlement to get it for free. So those arrangements were put in place. I may be wrong, but I think they went a bit further than they were intended to, because I think the initial intention of Cabinet was to basically fill the empty seats in the buses we contracted, rather than put on additional buses that were purely subsidised going round inside the circles. But I don't think that's the case anymore. So yes, time has moved on, and now, as you've flagged up, we have the situation that all pupils have the entitlement in terms of the free bus passes to use the regular or routine public services. The bottom line there is, as I said, that they don't always run in a way that would be effective in getting everybody to their school. And I'm not starting to open up the whole public transport debate. Members will have their own views in that, and we've touched it in this chamber at different meetings over the years before. But the bottom line is that it's not always possible, other than getting up really, it might be ridiculous travel times to get the bus to make sure you get to school in time. So there are issues round about that. But clearly, what I would say is nobody's obliged to take the subsidised seats. I think that's the fundamental point. It was an option that we were asked to develop for those who wanted the opportunity for their children who weren't entitled to go on the seats on a subsidised basis. So anyone who is in the habit or has been previously paying for a subsidised seat who now wants to switch to their free pass is in a position to do so. And they don't take the seat, and if they don't take the seat, they won't be charged. So the solution is actually in the hands of those families now who were paying the subsidy. If their children are now should all have their bus pass and entitled it for free, then the only issue for those families with children who are in that subsidised group is whether or not the public service is going to be sufficient to get them to school on time without getting up at a ridiculously early hour, and the same on the reverse journey. So there's no compulsion for anyone. If anyone wants to, I don't think we make them sign lifelong contracts. So if anyone wants to walk away from the subsidised seat arrangement, stop paying and use their bus pass, I'm maybe too simple, but I would have thought it's in their gift to simply do that. But I'm open whether colleagues know any more about it than me. But that's the background, that's the position we got to. And then the impact of the free bus passes as we come out of COVID is something that needs to be looked at. But to be honest, I think when we all look at it, if we haven't already, the answer is, as I said, in the hands of those who are currently taking those subsidised seats. Switch to the public service, utilise your bus pass, and you don't need to pay for a seat you're not using. I don't know if there's anything else from a schools perspective that I haven't covered, Linda, but
no,
perhaps not.
No, David, and through you, Chair, Councillor Mayben, you raise a really good point. I mean, it's something that everyone's talking about right now in terms of the availability of free transport, when clearly to the public eye, it would appear there's contracted transport passing past that the council is indeed paying for. But no, that position is entirely correct. I think what we need to look at in the future is, where all of our young people are and how we bring them in, and indeed that there are some issues we can look at, like college transport, etc., and not paying for additional transport when we don't need to, etc. So those are all being looked at the moment in terms of opportunities to utilise public transport, and particularly get the young people involved in learning how to use public transport, because for a lot of young people that's not something they've done, and particularly in some sectors we really want to encourage that independent travel as part clearly of climate change. So I think it's a good point well made around about the appearance of it, around about the paid travel in terms of our contracts, as opposed to clearly that's available to young people through the pass. So yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, Peter.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for those answers. I take it we have a school transport officer who's dealing with this, and instead of 3 half-empty buses running, we could have 2 fuller buses, changing the route slightly. Or if there's a bus half empty, we can maybe get a minibus and save some money and save some energy and fuel. And I take it we've got an officer who's constantly reviewing these things.
There's certainly an officer in the transport service which is now sits in Ara, that's George Corbett, that does it on an operational basis, and they regularly keep them under review, because it's not just the buses, it's the taxi journeys. So we're always keeping those under review, and we reserve the right in both contracts to amend the routes as required for that very reason, recognising things change. So yes, in principle, so not in principle, yes is the answer. They're within the transport section. We're always managing those contracts, because as members will know, and we'll probably get to soon, hopefully, in terms of the East Ayrshire Performs, it's a regular recurring feature in there, because it has been an area, it's caused issues in the budget, and it's under Linda's focus as well for that very reason, and it's been a problem area for quite some time, I mean several years. So yes, because we've already got overspend in that area generally, and have had historically for a number of years. So it's something that has been actively managed on a regular basis, not just by transport, but I know Linda keeps an overview on it as well, because those budgets were handed back to her, and not necessarily in as healthy a state as might have been suggested at the time, I think, but I'm sure Linda will agree with that.
Thanks, David. Okay, Peter, that's your last question.
No, two more. Page 30 in our papers, paragraphs 90, 91, 92, 93 about Ecoflex 4, the area-based schemes to insulate people's homes, and really around the cost of that. Paragraph 91, we're going to target financial support to improve the most energy efficient homes in our areas. I don't know if the council tenants would get that free, or I know Atrium Homes a year or two ago, they had a programme to put external wall cladding on homes. That was offered to private tenants, private residents who were not tenants of Atrium Homes. The cost back then was 1,200. I've now got it for a 3-bedroom home. They're talking about £3,200 during a cost of living crisis. So if you're not a tenant and you're a private resident with your own home and you want to take up this scheme, the cost of that £3,200 is, for many families, prohibitive when we're doing a cost of living crisis, and their energy bills are doubled or more. So I don't know if someone can comment on that and how we encourage folk to take up the area-based schemes and the Ecoflex and improve their homes and make their homes more energy efficient and save some money on their bills. I've got people, neighbours in my street, who are turning down this opportunity because £3,200 is ridiculous, and 2 years ago it was £1,200. The whole cost of the works is £13,450 to get your home clad in energy efficient insulation. But the £3,200 is your deposit on that to get that work done. It seems very high, and I don't know how we're going to encourage more folk to use it and get their homes more energy efficient and warmer and bring their bills down.
There's also a section there that says that the Energy Agency would apply a small referral fee to each application. James, could you just clarify both points, please?
Yep, happy to. So Ecoflex 4 is a scheme that targets the most energy inefficient homes in East Ayrshire, probably not the ones that you're talking about, Councillor Maven. So it's category, I think it's E, F and G in terms of the kind of efficiency rating of the homes. We reckon there's about 1,800 of these homes in East Ayrshire. Previously, we only included them when the council was doing work and they were part of that. And that's the reference to the area-based schemes. But what we're intending to do now is to open it up to everyone. And it is private sector and private owners. It's not council and housing association owners. And the entire costs of the upgrade works are actually paid by the energy company. And the fee that would be applied again would be met by the energy company. What we are, and the funding that we have within the council, is to establish the operation of that scheme and the approval of contractors to make sure that people know that they're getting the right contractor and that they're going to get a high standard of work. But this scheme specifically, as far as I'm aware, is fully funded by the energy agencies, and that's what we pay our green levy for, and that's how this scheme is funded. On the wider point of home energy efficiency, it's something that we're all considering with the cost of living crisis as we see our energy bills going up. And through the cost of living campaign, we've got a whole page and web pages around energy advice, and also the Home Energy Scotland, referring people to there, and that is where you can get grant support for making adaptations to your house to improve the insulation, heating, and there's a whole Scottish Government scheme that supports that, that I'm happy to provide information on. In terms of the costs escalating, I can't really comment on that. I think costs across society are increasing, and the percentage that people need to pay to meet that will obviously be rising, but there is support out there, and it's something that we are trying to encourage. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, James. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, James, for that reply. Last question, and what I thought would be the simplest, easiest question of them all to answer. And then I had a conversation with James yesterday on the phone, and as you're about to hear, the answer is much more complicated than you would think. How many trees did East Ayrshire Council plant last year, and how much did that cost?
Thanks, Chair. As I say, I've already given Councillor Maven a detailed answer on this. East Ayrshire Woodlands are our kind of main agency that deal with tree maintenance and planting. And in the last year, they planted almost 10,000 trees or so, but it ranges depending on planting seasons and what the projects, how many projects are woodland maintenance and how many are expansion. So it ranges between about 6,000 and 12,000 annually. We do have actually some funding within the Climate Change Fund. It's £60,000, which is going to support planting in the forthcoming year. And we reckon that will give us around 6,000 new trees in the new planting year. So that will be over and above this. In terms of cost to the council, a lot of these schemes are actually funded from external funding. We maximise that. We've got a couple of initiatives, the Wee Forest Initiative, which is very intensive planting of trees. And again, we get some external funding for that. Across the wider East Ayrshire area, and as is acknowledged, there is real potential, particularly in the South Authority through the coalfield communities and some of the open cast mines, and there is mass planting going on from the Forestry Commission. And we are actually, when you look at the East Ayrshire area-wide climate change figures, the carbon offset from the natural environment in East Ayrshire is actually quite significant. It's around 25%. But as I explained to Councillor Maven last night, the natural environment is actually the icing on the cake. What we really need to do in terms of climate change is to actually reduce our carbon footprint, and that's the first three. So we need to reduce the energy, we need to green our fleet and reduce our transport emissions, and we also need to reduce those emissions as a result of waste. If we don't do that, there wouldn't be enough land on earth to plant enough trees to offset our carbon emissions. So that's the icing on the cake, and that's when we get down to having made all these adaptations to our buildings, have a fully electric fleet, then we can start to look at carbon insetting, would be the term in East Ayrshire, as to how we could use that to get us to net zero. But that's for the longer term.
Okay, thanks, James. Councillor Cannon.
Oh, reasonably short question. Is flood mitigation part of the tree strategy? Because obviously trees, from carbon and all that kind of stuff, but I'm thinking my own ward, Camors, is a lot of flooding recently. I'm just wondering whether we can use that as part of the flood mitigation strategy at the same time as planting the trees.
Yeah, Chair, not my area of expertise, but yeah, I know that natural solutions in terms of our flood mitigation plans. That's the priority for us, is to use natural solutions, and tree planting is a really effective way, and obviously diverting into areas that were natural floodplains, and peat restoration and things like that. There's lots of opportunity again in East Ayrshire around these, and as I say, colleagues in ARA have a much more expertise in this area, but that is our priority. Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Richardson, and then we'll just wrap this up if that's all right.
That's a really, really quick question for James. And it's just there's a wee bit of personal interest, James, because my grandfather was the head forester up at the Dean Castle when it was owned by Lord Hilary Walden. And the reason I'm going to ask this is, when it was a private estate, there was a small sawmill where the riding school now is. And they used to churn out fence posts by the thousand. So my question is, it's great we're planting trees, but from a climate point of view, see when a massive big chestnut comes down in the forest up there, what do we do with that wood? What happens to the tree that's obviously we're going to replant, but what happens to the trees that come down, you know, through high winds, etc.?
Again, not my particular area of expertise, and Annika would be able to tell you that, but I do think that it's chipped, and I think I think we used to offer it to the public for wood chipping, but I'm not too sure. I would need to go and dig down into that. I'm afraid that's too specific for me, but I can certainly find out and get back to you.
It's just as long as it goes to good use.
Yeah, no, I can assure you that it does, and Paddy, Paddy MacDonald is actually working with our schools around how we use and make sure that we make the most of our natural environment and our resources, and is the other thing that we're looking at again through the schools is providing the schools with free compost for growing, and again that comes from our waste, and there's work going on there. So that whole circular economy is something that we're really keen to promote. I'm just apologies for not being able to answer that very specific question.
No worries. As long as it's no going to waste.
Okay, thanks, James. Okay, folks, the recommendation for the Governance Scrutiny Committee is on page 10, foot of page 10, with the additional recommendation built in previous, as agreed, David, that future years' reports are presented and considered by Governance and Scrutiny Committee prior to the start reporting deadline. Is that okay? Okay, members, with that, can we agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. Just before we head on to item 4, I'm just going to have an adjournment, a 5-minute adjournment. Okay, just 5 minutes, 11:55, folks. Thank you. Okay, folks, that's 11:58. So you'll see by the agenda, we've got another three big items and two smaller items. We have to be out of the chambers for 1 o'clock for the next Community Planning Partnership meeting. So I'm going to take each item as we go, and if we don't have time to go into the next item, my proposal is to adjourn the items to the next meeting. Are you agreeable with that? Okay, yeah, everybody's nodding their heads. Okay, thank you. Okay then, so the next item is item 4, and it's the Education Standards and Quality Report for 21-22. Okay, over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to bring Graham McGinn in as Deputy Head of Education for Performance and Assurance, who's going to present this report today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Chair. There is almost a seamless link to the previous reports. Members might have identified that James is on page 10 of the report as part of the climate conference work that went on, and it describes the role of children and young people at the climate conference on page 10. So it's a pity James has left. I don't know if he knows he's actually in the report, but I'll certainly let him know. So the report itself is a requirement of the National Improvement Framework for Education for local authorities to report on the impact of its priorities within education for each school session. The report provides an overview of the impact of priorities from school session 21-22. And each school, I should highlight, each school also prepares an individual standards and quality report. And the purpose of this report is to provide the overall local authority progress. And it does reference in parts achievements from individual schools where appropriate. What I would like to do for members' own information is on the very first page of the report, you'll see the picture of the children enjoying outdoor learning, and that's children at Muirkirk Early Childhood Centre on the front page. So the report includes progress in areas such as improving attainment, closing the attainment gap, improving health and wellbeing, improving employability and skills, working together with families and communities, and digital transformation and sustainability. I won't go through all the highlights of the report, it's a fairly lengthy report, but some of the highlights in the report that I would like to mention are the rollout of 1,140 hours in early years, so that's up to 30 hours free childcare for eligible children. Very positive primary school attainment following the challenges during the pandemic. An absolutely outstanding highest ever school leaver initial positive destination of 95.7%. And also the pupil-led work at Muirkirk Primary School, which focused on improving mental wellbeing, and it was also showcased at the Scottish Learning Festival. We are very proud of the achievements of children and young people who receive excellent and high quality support from colleagues across early years, primary, secondary and special schools, as well as partners. And at this stage, colleagues, I'm happy to take any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Okay, folks, I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. If you go to page 115 and look at the exclusions report, can you please give me a bit more information on why we had such a large increase on secondary school exclusions? A 10.4% rise does seem quite high, even compared to the figures that were issued pre-COVID. Thank you, Graham.
Graham.
Sorry. Thanks, Chair. Yes, Councillor Watts, we acknowledge the increase there since 2018-19, and of course there was that reduction during the COVID period where schools at times were closed. What I should highlight also is the fact that even with that increase, we're still 2.5 times less than we were in 2016-17. Unfortunately, we don't have a national comparator figure at this time because exclusions data is published every 2 years, so we don't have that national comparator to see if national exclusion rates have increased in that time as well. But I did engage with secondary head teachers and they are fully committed to minimising the number of temporary exclusions, because I think we need to be clear we are talking about temporary exclusions. Exclusions is a term that we use, but it's not a permanent exclusion from school that we're talking about. The head teachers do prioritise relationships and developing a positive culture and ethos in their schools. And they do develop partnerships with parents, carers and other council services and agencies to continue to meet the needs of children and young people. Overall, secondary head teachers have reported some challenges following the disruption of the past couple of years, particularly in re-establishing routines and high expectations. And to put the number of exclusions in context, 99% of our secondary pupils were not involved in any exclusions last year. So in summary, secondary head teachers are absolutely committed to only using exclusion when all other alternatives have been explored, to continue to focus on meeting the needs of children and young people with the greatest needs, by continuing to focus on relationships and areas such as developing the curriculum, like we're doing at SL33, to ensure young people are achieving within education.
Thanks, Graham. You want to come back in, Councillor Watts?
No, thank you, Graham. That's a good answer, thank you.
Okay, I've just been flicking through the report, and I really need to mention Muirkirk Primary, Didn't Hold Your Beach campaign. I mean, that's worthy of highlighting at this committee meeting. That's absolutely fantastic. And leaders in their own right, they're doing that, absolutely. And then Annan Hill Primary School, the Silver Rights, Respect and School Awards, onwards and upwards for next year's Gold Award. So I'm right behind them for that. I mean, the report's really full of really good, exciting stuff, and the achievements from our young people in East Ayrshire really makes you proud. So it's really fantastic. So, Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Richardson.
I've got to say, Chair, that I'm the exact same. I think it was a fantastic report, refreshing to see a lot of the brilliant work that's going on right across the authority. So thanks to our staff and our young people, our children and young people. And I've personally had a great time going round about all the schools with Linda and Maureen. So we really should be proud of what's going on within our schools just now. But a couple of wee questions I've got for Graham. Counselling services, is this right across the authority? Because I think it's a great thing. We used to have it before and then it got withdrawn. But is this something that's either been rolled out across the authority, or is that happening just now? I've got a couple of questions, so I'll just go on straight with them and then you can answer them all at the end time if you can.
Okay.
So the Grange, great to see a new build there. Is there going to be enough space going forward? Nether Third, it's been delayed. So have we got a time scale for that opening? St Sophia's, when will that be ready to go to the construction stage? Because I know there's problems with the design. So are we just a bit ready with that, or are we still getting into the new year with that? Doon Academy, I'm really pleased that we're getting a new school within our area. The paper says 30 million, but I think it's 41.1 that's going to be spent there. So I don't know whether that's a typo or I'm reading it wrong. I haven't seen the plans yet. I'm going to the public meeting tonight to see what's going to be getting built in Doon Academy. There is a lot of concerns within the local area, and I just hope that they get listened to tonight. So that, and the other one is Dunmelton ECC. It's saying it's complete. That building's not complete and there's no children in it yet. Have we got a time scale for that and why that's taking so long? Thank you.
Okay, over to yourself, Linda.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Stewart, and I too have enjoyed my visits with all members that we've been bringing you all round to see our amazing young people right through the ECCs and ASN sectors and into secondary. So I'll probably take the counselling services first, if I may, Councillor Stewart. So be delighted to know that the counselling services are right across the authority. They're available, members, just to clarify this, for young people who are 10 and over. It's not deemed appropriate to counsel a young person of under 10, but 10 and over, it's an absolute in every single school and every single education group. And you'll see hopefully the really interesting figures that have come through around about the rollout. It's just something that goes from strength to strength. We use the Exchange as our provider there, and you'll remember, members, as well, that a lot of this was generated out of concern over waiting lists for NHS-based services like CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, and we're really now able to give a a much swifter service and a more appropriate service, if I'm honest, as well, to support the needs of young people in school, many of whom, colleagues, as you'll note, have anxiety-based issues around about COVID, and I'm sure you've linked a lot of those through some of the stuff that's both been in the national press and indeed in this report around about attendance and the current need to try and work on bringing young people back to school. So delighted to report, Councillor Stewart, that's absolutely open to every single young person right across the authority, and can actually be adapted to need as well through the advocacy services that we have available in the ASN sector. What I'm going to do, Ref, the property questions, because I think he's just appeared on my screen and I saw his initials there. I'm going to bring Simon Bell in from that department, if that's okay, Councillor Stewart, to answer the questions in respect to the school buildings. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Over to you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks through you, Chair. So, yeah, just picking up on each of the kind of challenges we're facing with some of these schools projects that you've raised, Councillor Stewart. So, just taking them in order. Netherthird Primary School. I should say that the detail in all of these is part of the East Ayrshire Performance Report, which is just coming up, but I'll pick them up just now. So we're noting in the report that Netherthird has been impacted by a delay around about utility connections. But as you'll be aware, there's been a further complications arisen fairly recently in terms of the contractor getting statutory consent for some areas of work that have already been completed. I was going to say it's now looking like it is the case that he's going to have to change some works that he's already done. And the actual detail of that is just being finalised just now in conjunction with his consultants and the building controls consultants to get agreement over what the minimum scope of works is required to meet that statutory consent and get the completion certificate. So it's going to be after Christmas. There's a chance he might get the works completed before the Christmas break, but having discussed it with the Parent Council recently, the consensus is that even if they can sort of get over the hurdle just before the break, it makes sense to leave it to the new year until the pupils would return. So we're just looking for that final confirmation from Building Standards and the final programme for the contractor, and then parents will be advised on the plans for bringing the children back to the school. So that's Netherthird. St Sophia's, the project had been facing some financial difficulties as we were going through the design phases, and the decision was taken to actually change the procurement route for delivery of that project to give us the best chance of bringing the project in as economically as we can. So we're now going out to the marketplace for a competitive tender rather than negotiating a position with a contractor through what's called a pre-construction services agreement. That gives better competition in the marketplace and a better chance of getting a good price back. So again, we met fairly recently with the Parent Council, explained about that approach to provide the best solution for the school at the best cost, but unfortunately that impacts on the timescales for it. And parents were advised fairly recently by letter that it's likely, still got to go through a few kind of hoops and get the programme agreed, but it's likely that works wouldn't commence until the summer of next year. So parents have been updated on that one, and as I say, it's given us the best chance of delivering the best project at the best cost. Just moving to the Dolmellington Early Childhood Centre, again, it's been hit with some challenges. It's a design and build contract, the same as St Sophia's, so the contract, the same as the Netherthird project. So the contractor has that responsibility around about statutory approvals, and there's been complications around about agreement with Scottish Water for initially drainage connections and secondly water supply connections. We think, or we have now resolved, or the contractor's resolved the drainage connections, and he's finalising the water connection with Scottish Water just now. So pending a positive inspection and approval by Scottish Water, he's indicating that works will be completed before Christmas. So middle of December, I think, is actually 16th rings a bell as when that target is, pending the Scottish Water approval. Doon Academy, yeah, there's quite a range of stakeholder events this afternoon to look at the emerging designs. As with most projects, it's challenged financially, and we're working hard through the early stages of REBA Stage 3 that we're at now to try and rationalise the design, not compromise it, to bring it back on line with the budget, which I think at the moment is sitting at £33.5 million. We got some additional funding approved by Cabinet earlier this year. So that one's work in progress. So hopefully that gives you enough information, but happy to go into any further detail.
The Grange, I was looking at the Grange. So we put some new buildings on there. Are we going to have enough space going forward? That's kind of what I'm asking. And I thought Doon Academy was 41.1 million because we did agree at Cabinet, but it was I think it was 41.1 million that's going forward for that.
My apologies, I'll need to just check exactly where we are with the budget approval for Doon Academy. I'll do that and I'll come back to you. The Grange, yeah, from my own perspective, we have addressed kind of immediate capacity issues through the works that have been done there. I think it's recognised that there's potential challenges going forward, and that's something that will need to be reviewed through the medium term.
Okay, I'm just going to go over to Linda. I think she wants to come in with some information.
Thank you again, Chair. And Councillor Stewart, you again raised a really good point around Grange Campus. What I would do at this stage is just to remind members that we've remitted to you to come back with a review through Cabinet of the situation at Grange Campus. So whilst absolutely Simon recognises the short-term address of adding some additional modular accommodation on for Annan Hill moved us forward, then clearly we still need to look at the more medium and long-term solutions around about there, in particular connect that with, you know, the LDP programmes, etc., that are emerging and again coming forward. So we will be back to you. That review actually commences on my return from leave with a visit to Grange Campus to look at some of the scenarios, have further discussions with the head. So Councillor Stewart, you're absolutely right. We'll be bringing that one back, and that one will come through Cabinet for members' information in that particular space.
That's helpful, Linda. Thank you. Anything else? No, you're all right, Councillor Stewart. So just again, just in the report, page 124, the East Ayrshire School Counselling Annual Report. So I'm just looking down and the breakdown of sessions by theme. Oh, some of them are heartbreaking, I have to say. I mean, the top one's anxiety, you know, then it's anger, family, self-worth, self-harm, relationships with others, then stress, and there's even suicide in there. What I didn't get from the table though was numbers of people with these issues that are attending the sessions, just to give some kind of context around there. So is there any way that can be provided at some point later?
Absolutely, Chair. So we actually have a counselling services coordinator, Kerry Jarvis, who has data of that absolute nature. It's always that balance of how much to put in, but we'd be delighted to come back as an action of this meeting today, Councillor Jones, with a further breakdown of that. That's data we'll be able to get.
Yeah, that'd be appreciated. Thanks very much. Okay, so Councillors Richardson, Cogley, then Hogg.
Thanks, Chair. I didn't get my hand up quick enough. It's to go back very briefly to the secondary school point about the exclusions just having ticked up. A couple of things I heard that was really, really good. I mean, the fact that exclusions are used as the very last resort, that's great. But I also support any head teacher or any school having the right to exclude a pupil, because I do believe in a class of 30, if 29 of those young people's education's been held back by an unruly child and everything else has been tried, then, you know, the education of the 29 comes first over the one. And so exclusion's got to be there as an option in my book. But my question was, see if we decide to exclude a pupil from school for, say, a week, are there, what steps are in place? I take it's not just a case of telling the parents your child's coming home for a week and that's it. I take it the excluded child is given coursework to do, stuff like that.
Again, through you, Chair, thank you. Councillor Richardson, again, really rich questions on this front, and please know, as Graham suggested in the report, we use exclusion as a last resort, but ultimately, if exclusion is required, then it's head teachers are absolutely empowered to use it. Other than in the case, colleagues can add of a young person who is looked after and accommodated, in that case, they have to come to myself for those permissions around about ensuring that everything that's needed for that young person to be excluded is absolutely in place. So in a general exclusion, Councillor Richardson, there's a phone call to the parents, generally speaking, as well as a letter advising of the length of exclusion. The young person has to be provided with work. Whether or not that work is completed sometimes is an issue around about that. And every young person who is excluded must then attend a readmission meeting. Now, generally speaking, those take the form really more of a team around the child type meeting in some cases, because there might be other professionals involved with that young person, for example, social work, or it actually could have been a police or an offence type issue for which the young person was excluded, in which case the campus officer was there. So ultimately, the young person's readmitted, provided that they can sign up along with their parent to certain conditions. Usually those are of, alertness if they're feeling that they're in some sort of need of intervention before they actually begin to become really dysregulated, and then it becomes much, much harder to help. But the schools are very much guided on the principles of inclusion. Exclusion sits at the opposite side of that, as you'll know, but clearly it is something that we do have to use when it's required. And if I may add something to Councillor Watt's question, if that's okay, Councillor Watts, in response to that, the other issue that we are seeing that I think will indeed manifest itself in the national figures is a lot of young people attended secondary school for the first time ever that had never actually been inducted into secondary school way of life. Now, when they're in P7, there would usually be quite a big programme of visiting the secondary, getting to know how it works. It's a very big jump for a young person to go from being in the same class nearly every day in primary to, passing around a full school of the extent of some of the sizes of schools that we've got in East Ayrshire, and getting into that way of working, shall we say. So there's actually an awful lot of young people, and I think when the research comes out, our figures would show us, when we break them down further, S3 is an issue for us, and actually those young people never attended S1 and 2 particularly much through the COVID times, so they've not had that chance as such to get into the ways of working, realise that the expectations around the place. So there's quite a lot of data in support of that, as indeed there's data to show that actually P34 in primary schools, where again they've not had that pass on that they normally would have had. So I suspect strongly, as Graham says, that when the national exclusion figures come out, this won't be unique to East Ayrshire, but I also pick up Councillor Watt's point of seeing that increase and being concerned about that as we are. But ultimately, I reflect back on the start of my tenure in this particular post, where those figures in secondary school were 77.3 and they're now sitting at 28.5. So please, I think for Councillor Watts, know that that's something that's always on our radar and continually revisited at our own team meetings. So I hope that's helpful, Councillor Richardson.
Okay, well, thanks, Councillor Richardson. Thanks, Linda. Okay, Councillor Cogley.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and any opportunity to promote the good work that's been carried out at SL33. I would actually absolutely choose to do, and anyone who hasn't been to have a look at the work that is being done there, please do so. Now, my question actually relates to closing the attainment gap, section 2, page 116. How do we measure our success here, please?
Okay, Linda.
We're playing at who wants to answer that question, because I could be here for, well, I can't be here for 40 minutes, as you know, because of the timing, Councillor Cogley. So I'll hopefully go fairly as tight as I can on this. So closing the attainment gap initially, when it first became, if you like, a kind of mission statement around about education, was very much about ensuring equity in the system, such that young people from deprived backgrounds could achieve in the same way as those young people from lesser deprived backgrounds. Now, there's been a multitude of research in this space, Councillor Cogley, around about the merits and demerits that exist in this system, and ultimately for the purposes of the measurement of the attainment gap, it was always taken as quintile 5. And I promise I will explain this because typical teacher, but quintile 5 minus quintile 1, and that would give you the gap. Now, quintile 5 covers SIMD 9 and 10. in every local authority, and quintile 1 covers SIMDs 1 and 2 in every local authority. And as rudimentary as it sounds, it was a mathematical subtraction of the percentage of young people who attained in quintile 5, subtracted the number of young people who attained that similar level in quintile 1, and that then informed you of the gap. However, you will all know in this room, knowing your communities as well as you do, that's not necessarily a great indicator of whether or not a young person is in a deprived area. You can have a rental property in SIMD 9 that, you know, parents are struggling to fund, you know, they're in working poverty as such. So there's been a lot of research in this space, and actually, colleagues, what is now emerging is that free school meals would be a much better indicator of whether or not a young person is potentially living in poverty, alongside the multitude of other indicators that we can see. And my colleague David Faulkner at Loudon has really been a national exponent of this particular work. So at the moment, Councillor Cogley, it is the quintile 5 minus quintile 1. As a statistician to trade, I have real issues with it, but that's actually how it's measured. In terms of progress though, Councillor Cogley, you'll be delighted to know that we measure progress in all of the quintiles. And all of the SIMDs, if you like. A quintile is just a grouping of the 2 SIMDs, clearly. So we measure it right across, and we're looking for progress in all of the SIMDs right across the piece. We certainly don't hang our hat in East Ayrshire of just doing that subtraction. I think it's far too crude. It doesn't tell the story of our young people, and it doesn't tell the stories of our communities and schools. So ultimately, that's what we would use. I don't know if you have anything else to come in on, Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Councillor Cogley, one of the most important measures we would consider is, are we supporting young people at the point of exit from school into a positive destination? And in the last figures that we've got, what we can see is that 94% of young people who live in the most deprived deciles are transferring into a positive destination. So I suppose we do try to, give children and young people the best possible opportunities throughout their time in school, but also that point of exit from school is so important to make sure that they're set up for life. And 94% of the children and young people who left school in the most recent figures that we have, who live in the most deprived deciles, actually transferred into a positive destination. So we'd consider that quite significant.
Okay, Councillor Cogley.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Hogg.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you. This is a very excellent paper, and I have been around some of the schools recently, Dalrymple and Patna, and had a great old time. And as being a seasonal Grinch, I look forward to the nativity season with much joy. I'm going to ask a wee question in relation to the working with families and communities. I note the amount of hits that the HomeLink workers have had, and that is quite a huge amount, and also the community practitioners. My question is this an ongoing type of interaction, and do we have enough, looking at these figures, do we have enough people to take this forward for the schools? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hogg, and that there's 2 ways I could answer that. We could always never have enough people doing these jobs, because as you can see that they're doing such a great job. And again, the position of HomeLink worker was really born in these rooms, if you like, and they really have been such a key factor in supporting young people who, and their families, can I just say as well, around about attendance at school. And then when we look at the community practitioners aspect, very much around about that, really good early start in terms of that. I think where we're going at the moment is really good, Councillor Hogg, in terms of the financial inclusion workers as well, because a lot of the HomeLink workers' time had previously also been spent in supporting families access resources or benefits, clothing, you name it. And actually now with the advent and the council's passing of the cost of living paper, where we find ourselves now is having a financial inclusion officer available in each learning education group. It would help the head of education could get that name right there, but in each education group to having a financial inclusion officer. So I'm really hopeful, Councillor Hogg, that the HomeLink workers will be able to refocus on attendance. You'll know from stats today there's been a 3% drop in attendance nationally in schools. after COVID. A lot of young people got into a cycle of non-attendance and have found it quite difficult to return to school. So I'd be really hopeful that we could refocus the home link workers on the attendance front and use the financial inclusion officers in their relevant realms of expertise. So I suppose the answer would be you could never have enough, but yet at the same time, I think to answer the question specifically, I'd be really hopeful that with that slight shift change that's going to take place because of this council's actions in respect of the financial inclusion work, then I'd be quite hopeful would be covered. But if not, Councillor Hogg, please know we won't be shy. We would absolutely be looking to come back and have further discussions.
That's great, because I mean, when you look at those figures of almost 2,000 home visits and 16,500 texts and coaching sessions, it's really high. So it is a very important field to support kids at school and their families. So well done, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Stewart.
Yep, just a couple of wee questions, then I'm done. The Duke of Edinburgh Awards, a note on bullet point 2, it says disadvantaged participants registration. Just to clarify for me, what does disadvantaged participant mean? On the tracking about young people with positive destinations, how long do we track them for, and what do you mean by positive destination? Does it mean they're 6 months, they're a year, or 3 months? On digital transformation, we did have a great programme that went in through COVID, and we helped young folk with equipment and Wi-Fi. But I would expect that the Wi-Fi, the dongle things will be starting to run out. Have we got something in place that allows these young people still to be digitally connected? And on page 133, we're overspent on ASL. What does the additional demands mean? What do we need to be putting in there to make sure that we're no overspent, or we need to put additional funds in there?
Councillor Stewart, I think on page 133 we'll cover that when we go into that next item, because that goes into the next paper, okay? So just the ones, the exception of that last question, okay? Thanks, Linda.
Thanks again, Councillor Stewart. As an ex-head teacher that ran DofE in our school, DofE has got a bit of bad press around only attracting certain young people into the programme, and through discussions with the DofE leadership for Scotland, there's been a real push at making sure DofE is open. I think the wording around it's not particularly good. I don't like that disadvantaged term, and I apologise that that's made its way in there. The actual offer is really about making sure DofE isn't seen in an elitist way, if that's the most diplomatic way that I could put that, and that it's seen to be open to all young people. Now, what I would say as well, so that could be taken from both a social perspective, but also indeed members from an ASN perspective. And we actually run really successful DofE in our ASN schools, Loudon Communication Centre, etc. So the statement is meant more as a kind of opening up of DofE for young people to make sure it's accessible, because I think previously, if we were all honest in the space, it was seen as the activities that were perhaps more for young folk looking for it for UCAS and university entrance, whereas actually what we know is it's such a rich experience for all young people thinking about community service, which is a mandatory part of DofE. So I absolutely take your point on that, Councillor Stewart, and I'll ask the author of that particular section maybe to defer from using those particular terms in the future. If I can go to the tracking of positive destinations, Councillor Stewart, and also back to Councillor Cogley's point, SL33 means that we're in a position, colleagues, of really actually tracking a lot of our learners through to the age of 24. Mandatorily, it's a 16+ model, and usually it would be around about the age of 18. But we have committed through SL33 to be working not only with the young people, but also their families. And as you'll know, we're on a roll with SL33 in terms of making more SL33s, if I can use that particular term, to capture a lot of that. And we think we would need academic research to prove it, but we actually think that this is what's one of the factors, as well as not excluding young people, that's having a really big impact. As you can see, we've got the highest ever positive destinations in East Ayrshire Council, sitting at 95.7. What that means to me is if we need to go and get the other 4.3, but ultimately it's not one where we look back and say, oh, that's great, we'll rest on our laurels. So